My son served steak to everyone at the table and slid me a plate of cold leftovers without looking at me. But at sunrise, every card his family depended on went dead in their hands. Their nightmare had only just begun. I am Otis Jefferson, 74 years old, and for the last 3 years I have been a ghost in my own house. To the neighbors, I am just the old man in the faded coat who takes the bus to the community center. To my son Jamal and his wife Tiffany, I am a burden, a piece of furniture that breathes too loud and takes up too much space. They think I am senile. They think I am broke. They think I survive on a meager Social Security check that barely covers my medication. I let them think that. Silence has always been my shield, but tonight silence became my weapon. Before I tell you how I brought their world crashing down, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the very people you sacrificed everything for. It was Tuesday night, the night of Jamal's promotion party. My son had just been named regional sales director for a logistics company. He stood at the head of the mahogany dining table raising a crystal glass of imported red wine. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, the kind of suit I could never afford when I was his age. He was laughing, telling his guests about his hard work, his grind, his self-made success. I sat at the far end of the table near the kitchen door in the chair usually reserved for overflow guests or children. The room smelled of roasted garlic and rosemary. Tiffany had hired a private chef for the evening. She wanted everything perfect. She wanted to impress the other executives and their wives. She moved around the room in a silk dress that cost more than my first car, playing the role of the perfect hostess. She laughed at jokes that were not funny and poured wine with a practiced elegance. Then came the main course. The chef brought out a platter of Wagyu beef steaks, seared to perfection, the juices running clear and savory. The smell was intoxicating. It smelled like wealth. It smelled like celebration. Tiffany personally served the guests. She placed a large steaming cut of beef in front of Jamal's boss. She placed another in front of the boss's wife. She moved down the line, smiling, offering fresh ground pepper. Even Jamal got the biggest piece, the one with the perfect char. Then she came to me. The conversation in the room was loud, a buzz of self-congratulation and corporate gossip. No one was looking at the end of the table. Tiffany stopped in front of me. She did not have the silver platter. Instead, she reached onto the sideboard behind her and picked up a scratched, yellowing plastic plate. It was the kind of plate you give to a toddler who might drop it. She slid it across the polished wood until it hit my hand with a dull thud. There was no steak. There was no rosemary garnish. On the plastic plate sat a clump of macaroni and cheese from a box leftovers from 2 nights ago. It was cold. I could see the orange cheese had congealed into a hard, rubbery mass. Next to it was a single limp broccoli floret that had started to turn brown. "Enjoy, Dad," Tiffany whispered. Her voice was low, sweet poison meant only for my ears. "We ran out of the good meat, and I know how sensitive your stomach is to rich food. We would not want you having an accident in front of the guests, would we?" She patted my shoulder, a gesture that looked affectionate to anyone watching from across the room, but her nails dug into my old cardigan. She turned away before I could respond, her smile instantly brightening as she asked Jamal's boss if he wanted more wine. I looked down at the cold pasta. My stomach gave a hollow growl, but it wasn't hunger. It was a physical memory. I looked at the congealed cheese, and suddenly I was 35 years old again. I was standing in the break room of the steel mill, my hands black with grease that no amount of scrubbing could remove. I was looking at my lunch pail. It was empty. For 10 years, I did not eat lunch, not once. Jamal wanted to go to the private prep school across town, the one where the senators sent their sons. The tuition was more than my mortgage, so I worked double shifts. I walked to work to save bus fare, and I stopped eating lunch. I told my wife, God rest her soul, that the union provided meals so she wouldn't worry. I drank water and tightened my belt loop by loop until my ribs showed. I did it so Jamal would never have to touch a piece of steel with his bare hands. I did it so he could sit at a table like this. I looked up from the plastic plate and locked eyes with my son. Jamal was laughing at something his boss said, his head thrown back. But then his gaze drifted down the table. He saw me. He saw the plastic plate. He saw the cold leftovers while the juice from his $50 steak pooled on his china. For a second, just one heartbeat, I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. I waited. I held my breath. This was it. This was the moment. All he had to do was say something. All he had to do was say, "Tiffany, get my father a plate." All he had to do was acknowledge me as a man, as his father. But Jamal blinked. He looked at his boss, who was cutting into the beef. He looked at Tiffany, who was glaring at him with a warning in her eyes. And then my son, the regional sales director, the self-made man, turned his head. He lifted his glass. To success, he roared. The guests cheered. To success. I did not pick up my fork. My hands, still strong from decades of labor, rested on the edge of the table. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, colder than the pasta on the plate. It was the death of hope. For years I had made excuses for him. He is stressed, he is busy, he is trying to fit into a world I do not understand. But tonight, there were no excuses left. He was not busy. He was ashamed. I pushed my chair back. The sound was a harsh scrape against the floor, loud enough to cut through the chatter for a brief second. A few guests glanced over, confused to see the old man in the corner standing up. Leaving so soon, Mr. Jefferson, Jamal's boss, asked politely, "The steak is delicious." I looked at the man. He seemed decent. He had no idea he was sitting in a nest of vipers. "I am not hungry," I said. My voice was raspy, unused. I realized I had not spoken a single word to anyone all evening because no one had spoken to me. "Oh, let him go," Tiffany chimed in, laughing lightly. "Dad gets tired so early these days. The excitement is too much for him." "Right, Dad." She looked at me with eyes that dared me to make a scene. She knew I wouldn't. I was Otis Jefferson. I was the quiet man. I was the man who took the insults and swallowed them because I wanted peace for my family. But she did not know that Otis Jefferson was also the man who negotiated union contracts with steel magnates who wanted to crush us. She did not know that Otis Jefferson once stared down a line of riot police during the strikes of '82. She did not know because I never told her. I stepped away from the table. I picked up my cane, not because I needed it to walk, but because it made me look harmless. I walked past Jamal. He was studying his wine glass intently, swirling the red liquid, refusing to meet my eyes. "Good night, son," I said softly. He mumbled something into his glass. "Night, Dad." I walked toward the hallway that led to the kitchen. I had to go through the kitchen to get to the basement door. That was where I lived now. 2 months ago, Tiffany decided my bedroom on the first floor was needed for a home office for her influencer career. They moved my things into the unfinished basement. It was damp. It smelled of mold and furnace oil. There was one small window near the ceiling that let in a sliver of gray light. I reached the kitchen door when Tiffany caught up to me. She moved fast for a woman in heels. She grabbed my arm, her fingers pinching the loose skin. Her face was no longer the smiling hostess mask. It was twisted with annoyance. "You are embarrassing us," she hissed, her voice a low, snake-like whisper. "Leaving before dessert. Do you know who those people are?" I looked at her hand on my arm. I did not pull away. I just looked at it until she felt awkward and let go. "I am tired, Tiffany," I said. "Well, go down to your hole then," she spat. "And take that plate with you. I am not throwing away food just because you are too good for it. And listen to me, old man. Before you go to sleep, take the trash out to the curb. The bin is full of prep scraps. I do not want my guests smelling garbage when they leave." She leaned in closer, the smell of expensive perfume clashing with the cruelty of her words. "And try to be quiet down there. The floorboards squeak when you pace. It ruins the ambiance." She turned on her heel and marched back into the dining room. I heard her voice shift instantly into a bright, bubbly laugh as she rejoined the party. "Oh, he is just having a little spell, poor thing." I stood alone in the kitchen. The remains of the feast were scattered on the counters. Half-eaten appetizers, empty wine bottles, the trimmings of the beef. I looked at the garbage bag by the back door. It was bulging, leaking a little fluid onto the tile. "Take the trash out. Go to your hole. Be quiet." I opened the basement door. The draft of cold, musty air hit me. I walked down the wooden steps, each one creaking under my weight. I did not turn on the light. I knew the way in the dark. I sat on the edge of the cot that served as my bed. The mattress was thin, lumpy. Above me I could hear the muffled sounds of the party, the clinking of glasses, the laughter, the heavy footsteps of my son walking across the floor that I paid for. I reached under my pillow and pulled out my phone. It was an old flip phone taped together at the hinge. Jamal and Tiffany laughed at it. They called it a dinosaur. They did not know that this phone was the only line of communication to a world they couldn't even imagine. I opened the phone. The screen glowed pale blue in the darkness. I dialed a number I had memorized 30 years ago. It rang twice. "Yeah." A voice answered. Gruff. Alert. It was Ezekiel, my oldest friend, my lawyer. The man who knew where every single body was buried because we had buried some of them together, metaphorically speaking, during the Union Wars. Zeke, I said. My voice was steady. The rasp was gone. Otis. Is everything all right? You never call this late. I looked up at the ceiling boards. Dust was falling from the vibrations of the party upstairs. I thought about the cold pasta. I thought about the 10 years of hunger. I thought about the look in Jamal's eyes when he turned away. It is done, Zeke, I said. There was a long pause on the other end. Ezekiel knew what that meant. We had discussed it as a possibility, a nuclear option, but he never thought I would pull the trigger. Are you sure? Otis, Zeke asked softly. Once we do this, there is no going back. The boy, he will be wiped out. I closed my eyes. I saw the little boy I taught to ride a bike. Then I saw the man who let his wife serve me garbage on a plastic plate. He is not a boy, Zeke. He is a man who made a choice tonight. Now I am making mine. Okay, Zeke said. I could hear the sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. Give me the word. Execute Protocol Omega, I said. Protocol Omega. The end. Freeze it all, Zeke. The credit cards, the bank accounts, the car leases, the mortgage payments, the utilities, everything that has my name on the back end, everything that flows from the trust. Cut the cord. Done, Zeke said. The keystrokes stopped. By the time the sun comes up, they won't be able to buy a pack of gum. Thank you, brother, I said. Where will you go? Zeke asked. I am not going anywhere, I said. I am going to stay right here in this basement. I want to see their faces when the card reader declines. I hung up the phone. I lay back on the cot, still wearing my coat because the basement was freezing. Upstairs, the party was winding down. I heard the guests leaving. I heard Tiffany giggling. I heard Jamal say, "This is just the beginning, baby. We are going straight to the top." I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. He was wrong. They weren't going to the top. They were about to find out that the floor they stood on was made of ice, and I had just turned up the heat. My stomach growled again, demanding food. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a granola bar I had hidden there days ago. I ate it slowly in the dark. It tasted better than any Wagyu steak. It tasted like freedom. Upstairs, the lights went out. The house fell silent. But I did not sleep. I waited for the sun. I waited for the morning. I waited for the moment the world would tilt on its axis. Because tomorrow Jamal Jefferson was going to learn a lesson that wasn't taught in his expensive prep school. He was going to learn that you never, ever bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand is the only thing holding you up from the abyss. End of part. The dampness of the basement settled into my bones like a second skin. It was a cold, penetrating ache that reminded me of the winter of '78 when we stood on the picket line for 3 weeks straight without pay. But back then I stood with brothers. I stood with men who would have taken a bullet for me. Now I sat alone on a cot that smelled of mildew, shivering in the house I bought, listening to the people I loved plotting my demise. I did not turn on the single bulb that hung from the ceiling. Darkness was safer. Darkness helped me think. I sat on the edge of the mattress, my breath forming faint clouds in the frigid air. They had turned off the heat to the basement weeks ago. Tiffany said it was a waste of energy since I was down here anyway, and old people were always cold regardless of the thermostat. I wrapped my old Union jacket tighter around my shoulders. It was frayed at the cuffs, but it still held the warmth of better days. Above me, the floorboards creaked. The party was over. The guests had gone, and the house should have been silent. But the vent, an old metal duct that ran along the ceiling, acted like a microphone carrying their voices down to me with cruel clarity. They were in the kitchen right above my head. I heard the pop of a cork. Champagne. They were celebrating. Can you believe the look on his face? Tiffany's voice drifted down, shrill and mocking. It sounded like tin scratching against glass. When I gave him that plate of slop, I thought he was going to cry. God, he is pathetic. I heard Jamal laugh. It was a deep belly laugh, the kind he used to have when we watched football together. Now he was laughing at me. He just took it, Jamal said. He always just takes it. The man has no spine left. He is just a shell tiff, a broke, useless shell. I stared at the dusty concrete floor. No spine. I wondered if he knew that his spine, his very posture, was paid for by the sweat of my brow. I wondered if he knew that the suit he wore, the car he drove, the air he breathed in that luxury kitchen was all funded by the man he called a shell. "So when do we do it?" Tiffany asked. Her voice dropped an octave, becoming serious, conspiratorial. "When do we get rid of him? I cannot stand the smell of old man in my house anymore." "It lingers, Jamal. It is embarrassing." "Soon," baby Jamal replied. I could hear him pacing, the heavy thud of his Italian leather shoes vibrating through the wood. "I just need one more thing." "What?" Tiffany snapped. "Just kick him out, put him on the street, or better yet, drive him to that state facility on 4th Street, the one with the barred windows." "Patience, Tiff," Jamal said, his voice smooth, calculating. "I need his signature first. He has that little pension fund from the steel mill. It is not much, maybe a few hundred a month, but if I can get power of attorney, I can drain the lump sum. It is probably only 5 or 6 grand, but hey, that is a weekend in Cabo for us. 5 or 6 grand. I closed my eyes in the dark. They were vultures picking at a carcass, fighting over scraps of meat, completely unaware that they were standing on a gold mine. They thought my pension was peanuts. They had no idea. "Once I get that signature next month," Jamal continued, "we will dump him. I promise. And then Tiffany asked, her voice dripping with greed. "And then we renovate this basement," Jamal said. "We gut it, rip out that nasty drywall. We turn this whole space into that wine cellar you wanted, climate-controlled, cedar racks. We can hold tastings down here." A wine cellar. I looked around my prison. The damp walls, the exposed pipes, the spiderwebs in the corners. They wanted to replace me with bottles of fermented grapes. They wanted to turn the place where I slept into a shrine to their vanity. "That sounds perfect," Tiffany purred. "Just imagine. No more coughing at night, no more shuffling footsteps. Just us. And our wine." They clinked glasses. The sound rang through the vent like a bell tolling for a funeral. My funeral. I sat there for a long time, listening to the silence return as they moved upstairs to the master bedroom. My bedroom. The room where my wife died in my arms. The room they had taken from me without a second thought. I did not cry. Tears are for those who have hope that someone will dry them. I had no such hope. I had only clarity. The cold leftovers on the plastic plate had been an insult. This conversation was a declaration of war. I reached under the thin, lumpy pillow and pulled out my phone. It was an old flip phone, a relic from another era. Jamal and Tiffany mocked it constantly. "Why don't you get an iPhone, Dad? You are so out of touch." They didn't know that this phone was secure. They didn't know that this phone was the only thing connecting them to their lifestyle. I opened it. The small screen lit up my calloused hands. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang once. Twice. "Yeah." The voice on the other end was rough, gravelly. It was the voice of a man who had seen everything and feared nothing. Ezekiel. My oldest friend. My lawyer. The man who had stood back to back with me when the company goons came with baseball bats in '82. "Zeke," I said. My voice was steady in the quiet basement. "Otis, it is late. Everything okay?" "No, Zeke. Nothing is okay." I heard the rustle of sheets on the other end. Ezekiel was sitting up. He knew that tone. He knew that when Otis Jefferson spoke like that, the earth was about to shake. "What happened?" he asked. "They are planning to put me in a state home, Zeke, next month, after they trick me into signing over my pension." There was a silence on the line, a heavy, dangerous silence. Then Ezekiel let out a low breath. "The boy, he really said that. He said it. And his wife, she wants to turn my room into a wine cellar." "A wine cellar," Ezekiel repeated, the disgust evident in his voice. "Jesus, Otis, we tried. We really tried to help him." "We did," I said. I thought about the monthly transfers. For 5 years, on the first of every month, I had Ezekiel wire $15,000 into a shell account that Jamal believed was a recurring performance bonus from his company. I had set it up years ago, pulling strings with the board of directors, a board I sat on, though Jamal had no clue. I owned 40% of the logistics firm he worked for. I was the silent majority shareholder. I had gotten him the job, I had gotten him the promotion, and I had been paying his salary plus a massive bonus out of my own pocket every single month. $15,000. Every 30 days. It paid for the Range Rover. It paid for the designer clothes. It paid for the Wagyu beef I wasn't allowed to eat. They thought they were rich. They thought they were successful. They thought I was a leech. They didn't know they were the parasites. Otis, Zeke said softly, "You know what we have to do." "I know," I said. I looked up at the vent one last time. I could almost hear their breathing, their smug, comfortable sleep. They were sleeping on a bed of lies that I had built for them. "Zeke," I said, gripping the phone until the plastic creaked. "Activate Protocol Omega." "Are you sure?" Zeke asked. "There is no coming back from this. Once I hit that button, the money stops. All of it. The cards, the accounts, the auto pays. The house is in the trust's name. The cars are leased through the holding company. If I freeze it, they are naked Otis. They will have nothing by breakfast." I looked at the cold macaroni on the floor where I had set the plate. I thought about the wine cellar. I thought about the state home with the barred windows. "Freeze it," I said. "Freeze it all. Every dime, every credit line, every asset. I want them to wake up in a world that doesn't recognize them." "Consider it done," Zeke said. His voice was grim but efficient. "I am logging into the mainframe now. It will take me about 10 minutes to override the standing orders. By sunrise, their plastic will be just plastic." "Thank you, brother," I said. And Otis, Zeke added, "Get some sleep. You are going to need your strength for the show tomorrow." "I won't sleep, Zeke. I am going to watch the sun come up." I closed the phone with a snap. The blue light vanished, plunging me back into the darkness. But it didn't feel cold anymore. I felt a fire burning in my chest, a righteous cleaning fire. $15,000 a month, $180,000 a year, plus the house, plus the cars, plus the tuition for my granddaughter's private school, which I paid directly to the institution while Jamal told everyone he was a self-made man. I had given them a kingdom, and they had treated me like the court jester. I stood up and walked to the small, grimy window near the ceiling. I could see a sliver of the moon. It looked sharp like a scythe. Jamal thought I was senile. He thought I was weak. He forgot who I was. I was the man who organized the strikes. I was the man who stared down CEOs and mobsters and politicians. I was the man who built a fortune from nothing but grit and smart investments in real estate when everyone else was buying fancy cars. I touched the cold glass. "Enjoy your sleep, son," I whispered to the ceiling. "Enjoy your dreams of wine cellars and vacations in Cabo. Because when you wake up, the bank is closed. The landlord is calling. And the old man in the basement holds the only key." I sat back down on the cot and waited. I waited for the dawn. I waited for the moment when the digital guillotine would fall. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was ready. The lesson was about to begin. I sat on the edge of my cot in the basement, watching the dust motes dance in the sliver of sunlight that managed to pierce through the ground-level window. It was 7 a.m. I could hear the heavy thud of footsteps upstairs. The floorboards groaned under the weight of entitlement. They were getting ready. The morning routine of the Jefferson household was a symphony of excess that I had funded for 5 long years. I heard the hiss of the espresso machine, a $3,000 Italian contraption that Tiffany insisted was essential for her mental health. I heard the roar of the shower in the master bathroom, wasting gallons of hot water while I washed my face with a cold rag from a bucket down here. I waited. I had not slept a wink, but I was not tired. I felt a hum of energy beneath my skin, the same way I used to feel right before a strike vote was tallied. The dice were rolling. At 8:15, the garage door rumbled open. I moved to the small window and peered out through the grime. I saw the tires of the Range Rover. Tiffany was leaving for her weekly spa appointment. It was a ritual. Every Wednesday, she spent $500 on facials and massages to recover from the stress of doing absolutely nothing. She backed out of the driveway, the engine purring like a well-fed cat. She had no idea that the gas in the tank was the last thing she would own for a very long time. 10 minutes later, Jamal left. He was driving the Porsche Panamera. I watched the sleek black car slide out onto the street. He was heading to the office to play the big shot, to bark orders at people who worked harder than him, secure in the knowledge that his bonus check would clear on the 1st of the month. I sat back down and folded my hands. Now the waiting game truly began. Across town, Tiffany Jefferson was parking the Range Rover in the valet lot of the Serenity Day Spa. She tossed the keys to the attendant without looking him in the eye. She walked into the lobby, the smell of eucalyptus and lavender enveloping her. She checked in at the marble counter, flashing her teeth at the receptionist. I know this because Ezekiel's private investigator had cloned her phone weeks ago. We could see the GPS. We could see the transaction attempts in real time on the secure tablet Zeke had given me. She went in for the diamond peel facial and the hot stone massage. For 2 hours, she lay on a heated table while someone rubbed oil into her skin. She probably fell asleep. She probably dreamed of the wine cellar she was going to build in my room. Then came the moment of truth. Tiffany walked to the front desk, her skin glowing, her hair wrapped in a plush towel. The receptionist smiled and presented the bill. $480 plus a 20% gratuity, automatically added because Tiffany never tipped well on her own. Tiffany reached into her designer bag and pulled out the black card. It was a heavy piece of metal, cool to the touch. It was the symbol of her status. She placed it on the counter with a delicate click. The receptionist swiped it. There was a silence. A long, uncomfortable silence followed by a sharp beep. I am sorry, Mrs. Jefferson, the receptionist said, her smile faltering just a fraction. It was declined. Tiffany laughed. It was a brittle, sharp sound. Do not be ridiculous. Swipe it again. Your machine must be broken. It is a black card. It does not have a limit. The girl swiped it again. Beep. Declined. Try the chip. Tiffany snapped, her voice rising. She inserted the card. The machine thought for a second, then flashed a red light. The message on the screen was clear. Account frozen. Contact issuer. I watched the alert pop up on my tablet screen in the basement. Transaction denied. Reason protocol Omega. Tiffany began to panic. She dug through her purse, her manicured nails clicking frantically against leather. She pulled out the Visa. Declined. She pulled out the American Express Platinum. Declined. She pulled out the emergency debit card linked to the joint account. Declined. Every single card came back with the same message. Contact primary account holder. People in the lobby were starting to stare. The women in their robes holding cups of herbal tea whispered behind their hands. The facade was cracking. Tiffany Jefferson, the woman who posted photos of her shoebox collection on Instagram, could not pay for her facial. She felt the heat rise up her neck. The shame was a physical blow. She had to leave her driver's license with the receptionist as collateral, promising to come back with cash. She ran out to the valet stand, her face burning. She reached for a $5 bill to tip the valet, but her wallet was empty. She had to drive away while the valet stared at her with open contempt. She grabbed her phone and dialed Jamal. While Tiffany was melting down in the spa parking lot, Jamal was 5 miles away at a gas station. He had stopped to fill up the Porsche with premium unleaded. He stood by the pump, talking loudly on his headset, bragging to a colleague about the new golf clubs he was planning to buy. He inserted the card into the reader. See cashier. He frowned, annoyed. He tried another card. See cashier. He muttered a curse and walked into the station store. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. There was a line of people waiting to buy lottery tickets and energy drinks. Jamal cut to the front, ignoring the glares of the construction workers in dusty boots. Turn on pump 4, he commanded, throwing his card on the counter. Premium, fill it. The clerk, a teenager with acne and a name tag that was crooked, stared at him blankly. He swiped the card. It is not working, bro, the clerk said. Says card is invalid. Jamal scoffed. Try it again. That is a corporate card. It has 50 grand on it. It ain't got 50 cents on it right now, the clerk said, enjoying this a little too much. Declined. Do you have cash? Jamal patted his pockets. He never carried cash. Cash was for poor people. Cash was for me. He realized with a jolt of horror that he had $0 in physical currency. He looked at the line of people behind him. A large man in a reflective vest crossed his arms. You gonna pay, or you gonna move fancy pants? Jamal turned red. He ran back out to his car. He began to tear through the interior. He opened the center console. Nothing. He checked the glove box. Nothing. He was on his hands and knees digging under the passenger seat, his expensive suit jacket dragging on the dirty pavement. He found a quarter. A dime. 3 pennies stuck together with old soda. He scraped together $4.37 in loose change. He walked back into the store, his head low, avoiding the eyes of the workers. He dumped the sticky coins on the counter. $4 on pump 4, he whispered. The clerk counted the change, slowly making a show of it. That will get you about a gallon, bro. Don't go far. Jamal walked back to his Porsche. He pumped the single gallon of gas. The nozzle clicked off almost immediately. He got back in the car, slamming the door. His phone rang. It was Tiffany. Jamal. She was screaming so loud he had to pull the phone away from his ear. My cards. They are not working. They took my license at the spa. What is going on? I do not know, Jamal shouted back, his voice cracking with fear. I am at the Shell station and I just had to pay with pennies. The accounts are locked, all of them. Who did this? Tiffany shrieked. Did you miss a payment? Did you forget to transfer the funds? I did not forget anything, Jamal roared. It is the trust. The automatic deposit didn't hit. The bank must have flagged it. We need to call them. Call them. Call who? We do not even know who runs the trust. It is just an account number. Jamal gripped the steering wheel. He was sweating. The air conditioning in the car was on full blast, but he felt like he was suffocating. He realized in that moment how little he actually knew about the money that sustained his life. He thought it was a bottomless well. He never asked where the water came from. I am going home, he said. I need to find the paperwork. I need to find the original documents. Maybe the old man knows something. Your father? Tiffany laughed, a hysterical, jagged sound. That senile old fool. He does not even know what day it is. He might have thrown something away, Jamal said, grasping at straws. He gets the mail first sometimes. Maybe he threw out a notice from the bank. Maybe he messed this up. I am going to kill him, Tiffany hissed. If that old man touched our money, I am going to throw him out on the street myself. Jamal hung up and floored the accelerator. The Porsche roared, burning through the gallon of gas he had just bought with humiliation. I was sitting in the rocking chair in the basement when I heard the front door slam open. It hit the wall with such force I thought the hinges would snap. Dad Jamal's voice boomed through the house. It wasn't the voice of a son greeting his father. It was the voice of a master summoning a disobedient servant. I heard his heavy footsteps thundering down the hallway. He didn't even stop to take off his shoes. He stomped across the hardwood straight to the basement door. He yanked it open and came charging down the stairs, taking them two at a time. He burst into my room, his chest heaving, sweat beading on his forehead. His eyes were wild. He looked like a cornered animal. I looked up from my newspaper. I kept my face blank, the mask of the confused, harmless old man firmly in place. "Hello, son," I said slowly. "You are home early?" "Cut the crap," Jamal screamed. He kicked a cardboard box of my old books, sending them skidding across the floor. "What did you do?" I blinked, adjusting my glasses. "Do I have been here all morning, Jamal?" "Reading, the bank." Jamal yelled, getting in my face. I could smell the fear on him. It smelled sour. The accounts are frozen. Every single one. My cards are dead. Tiffany is stuck at the spa. I had to beg for gas money. What did you do with the mail? Did you hide a letter? Did you throw something away? I looked at him calmly. I saw the panic in his eyes. He truly believed this was an accident. He truly believed that the only way his life could fall apart was if I, in my incompetence, had made a mistake. It never occurred to him that I had the power to destroy him. "I do not touch your mail, Jamal," I said softly. "You told me not to." "Then why is the money gone?" he screamed, grabbing his hair. "The trust fund. The monthly deposit. It didn't come through. The bank says the primary account holder froze the assets." Primary account holder. I almost smiled. He said the words, but he didn't understand them. He thought the primary account holder was some faceless banker in Switzerland or a computer algorithm. He didn't realize the primary account holder was sitting on a lumpy cot 3 feet away from him wearing a 10-year-old sweater. "I don't know anything about banks, son," I said, making my voice tremble just a little. "You know I only have my Social Security card. Is there a problem with your bonus?" "It is not a bonus. It is my money. It is my entitlement." Jamal paced around the small room, kicking at the legs of my cot. Someone shut it off. Someone pressed a button and killed my life. "Maybe it is a glitch," I suggested helpfully. "Computers make mistakes. A glitch doesn't freeze 5 different credit lines at the same time," Jamal shouted. He looked around the basement, his eyes landing on my old filing cabinet in the corner. He rushed over to it and ripped the drawers open. "What are you doing?" I asked, standing up. "I am looking for the papers. You must have hidden them. You hoard everything down here like a rat." He began tossing my papers onto the floor. My old union cards, my medical records, photos of his mother. He threw them like they were trash. He was tearing apart the only privacy I had left. "Jamal, stop," I said. He ignored me. He pulled out a folder labeled pension. He ripped it open. $800. He laughed, waving the statement in my face. "This is it. This is all you have. You are pathetic, old man. You have nothing. You are a leech. He threw the papers in my face. They fluttered down like dead leaves. I stood there watching him destroy my room. I watched him trample on the photo of his mother, and in that moment the last tiny ember of guilt I felt about cutting him off was extinguished. He wasn't searching for answers. He was searching for a victim. He needed someone to blame for his own helplessness. "Tiffany is coming home," Jamal spat, breathing hard, "and we are going to get to the bottom of this. If you did something, if you messed up one single form, Dad, I swear to God you will wish you were already in that state home." He stormed back up the stairs, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my belongings. I knelt down and picked up the photo of my wife. The glass in the frame was cracked. I brushed the dust off her smiling face. "I am sorry, Martha," I whispered, "but the boy we raised is gone." I sat back down on the cot. I could hear Jamal upstairs slamming cupboards, shouting into his phone, calling the bank, calling his office, calling anyone who would listen. He was screaming at a hurricane, thinking he could command the wind. He didn't know that the hurricane was me. I reached into my pocket and touched the phone. I had a text message from Ezekiel. "Phase 1 complete. All assets secured. The eviction notice for non-payment of rent on the house is being drafted now. Should I send it?" I looked at the cracked photo. I looked at the ceiling where my son was stomping around, cursing my name. "Send it," I whispered. The morning of chaos was just the opening act. By noon, the real show would begin. And Jamal Jefferson was about to find out that the man he called a leech owned the very ground he was standing on. I sat on the edge of my cot holding a newspaper that was 3 weeks old. I pretended to read the sports section, but my eyes were fixed on my son. Jamal was tearing my room apart like a man possessed. He pulled the drawers out of my plastic dresser and dumped them onto the floor. My undershirts, my socks with the holes in the heels, my old union patches, they all scattered across the cold concrete. He shook out my winter coat. He patted down the pockets of my trousers hanging on the nail. He was looking for a paper trail. He was looking for a statement, a letter, anything that would explain why his life had suddenly hit a brick wall. "What did you do with it?" he screamed, throwing a shoebox full of old receipts against the wall. "Where's the notification? The bank doesn't just freeze a trust fund without sending a letter." I lowered the newspaper slowly. I adjusted my glasses, making sure my hands trembled just enough to look convincing. "I do not know what you are talking about, son," I said, my voice rising in a pitch of confused innocence. "What bank are you shouting about? I only have my little account at the credit union, the one with $800 in it. I went there Tuesday to get money for my blood pressure medicine. The teller, Mrs. Higgins, she said everything was fine." Jamal stopped. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and rage. He ran a hand over his face, wiping away the sweat. "I am not talking about your peanuts, Dad," he yelled. "I am talking about the big account, the family trust, the one that pays for this house, the one that pays for my car." I blinked. I frowned, deepening the wrinkles on my forehead. "Family trust?" I asked. "I did not know we had a trust. Your mother and I, we just had savings bonds. Did you win the lottery?" Son Jamal let out a groan of frustration. He kicked a pile of my clothes. "You are useless," he muttered. "Completely useless. You don't even know how we live. You think money just falls from the sky." I stayed silent. I wanted to tell him that money did not fall from the sky. It came from double shifts at the foundry. It came from investing in laundromats and corner stores in the 80s when nobody else wanted them. It came from compound interest and living below your means. But I said nothing. I let him believe I was the fool. He turned his back on me and started pacing the small room, tapping furiously on his phone. "It has to be a glitch," he said, talking more to himself than to me. "It is a system error. The bank merged or updated their software. That happens. Yeah, that is it. The primary account holder flag. It is probably just a security protocol trip. I just need to get someone on the line." He was bargaining. He was in the denial stage of grief. He could not accept that the money was gone, because if the money was gone, he was nobody. He was just a man in an expensive suit with no gas in the tank. Suddenly we heard the front door upstairs open, then a slamming sound that shook the dust from the ceiling rafters. Jamal. It was Tiffany. Her voice was a shriek. I heard her heels clicking rapidly on the hardwood floor, then the heavy thud as she descended the basement stairs. She appeared in the doorway. She looked like a wreck. Her hair was half up, half down. Her mascara was smeared under one eye. She was still wearing the plush white robe from the spa, but she had thrown a trench coat over it. She was barefoot. She saw Jamal standing amidst the wreckage of my room. She saw me sitting on the cot. She didn't say a word. She just swung her designer handbag, a heavy leather thing with gold buckles, and threw it. It flew across the room and hit me square in the chest. The buckle struck my collarbone. I grunted in pain and dropped the newspaper. Tiffany Jamal shouted, shocked. "Shut up," she screamed, turning on him. "Do you know what happened to me? Do you have any idea? They took my license. They made me leave my diamond earrings as collateral. I had to walk 3 blocks to get a taxi, and then the taxi driver kicked me out because I didn't have cash. I had to walk home. Barefoot in a robe. She was hyperventilating. Her eyes were wide and wild. She looked at me with pure hatred. And this thing is just sitting here reading the paper." She marched over to me. I could smell the sweat of panic breaking through her expensive perfume. "Give me money," she demanded. She held out her hand, snapping her fingers. "Right now." I rubbed my chest where the bag had hit me. It would bruise. I added that bruise to the ledger in my mind. The debt was growing. "I don't have any money, Tiffany," I said softly. "Do not lie to me, old man," she screeched. "Old people always stash cash. You probably have it stuffed in your mattress or hidden in a coffee can. Give it to me. I need $500 right now. I have to go back and tip the girls at the spa. If I don't, they will talk. They will ruin my reputation." A tip. She wanted $500 for a tip. She had just assaulted me. She was standing in the ruins of my life. Her husband was penniless, and her biggest concern was her reputation at a day spa. I looked at Jamal. He did not step in. He did not tell her to stop. He was looking at me too with expectant eyes. He hoped I had a stash. He hoped I could solve this immediate problem so the screaming would stop. "Dad, if you have any cash, just give it to her," Jamal said weakly. "We will pay you back when the bank glitch is fixed. Pay me back." I almost laughed. I reached into the pocket of my trousers. My hand moved slowly. I let them wait. I let the tension build. Tiffany's eyes were locked on my hand like a hawk watching a mouse. I pulled my hand out. My fingers were clenched in a fist. I opened them slowly. Sitting in the center of my calloused palm was a single bill. It was crumpled. It was soft from age. It was $5. Abraham Lincoln stared up at us. "This is it," I said. My voice was low. "This is all I have left from my check. I was saving it for a haircut." Tiffany stared at the $5 bill. Her face went slack. For a moment she looked like she didn't understand what she was seeing. Then her face twisted. Her lips curled back in a snarl that revealed her teeth. $5, she whispered. "You have $5? "That is it," I said. She slapped my hand. The bill fluttered to the floor, landing in the dust next to my work boots. "You useless, pathetic waste of space," she hissed. And then she did something that I will never forget. She gathered the saliva in her mouth, she looked me dead in the eye, and she spat. The glob of spit landed on the concrete floor right next to the toe of my boot. It was inches from the $5 bill. I looked at the spit. I looked at the money. I looked at my son, who turned his head away in shame but said nothing. I did not wipe the spit away. I did not yell. I just sat there, clutching my bruised chest, and looked up at her. "Is that all I asked?" Tiffany let out a scream of frustration. She turned to Jamal and started pounding on his chest with her fists. "Fix this!" she shrieked. "Fix this! Now I cannot live like this! I need money! I need my cards! Get him out of here and find the money!" Jamal grabbed her wrists. "Calm down. It is a mistake. I am going to call corporate. I am going to go down to the bank branch right now. We will sort this out." He looked at me one last time. There was no love in his eyes, only resentment. "Clean this mess up, Dad," he said, gesturing to the clothes he had thrown on the floor. "And stay down here. I don't want to see your face until I fix this." He dragged a sobbing Tiffany up the stairs. I heard them arguing all the way down the hall. I heard the door to his study slam. I was alone again. I reached down and picked up the $5 bill. I dusted it off carefully. I folded it and put it back in my pocket. Then I looked at the spit on the floor. I did not clean it up. I left it there. I wanted to look at it. I wanted to remember it. That spit was the seal on the warrant. It was the final signature on the eviction notice. I reached for my phone under the pillow. I didn't call anyone. I just checked the time. It was almost noon. The banks were open. The real estate offices were open. The world of commerce was humming along. And upstairs, my son was dialing numbers that would ring in empty rooms. He was trying to unlock doors that I had welded shut. I sat back on the cot and listened to the silence of the basement. It was heavy. It was cold. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like justice. They wanted money. They wanted dignity. They wanted to be special. Well, they were about to find out just how special they really were. I closed my eyes and waited for the next crash. It wouldn't be long now. The utilities were set to cut off at 1 p.m. The heat was already gone. The lights were next. And when the darkness came for them, they would find that the only person with a light was the old man they had just spat on. 3 days passed in a suffocating, terrifying silence. The house usually vibrating with the bass of Jamal's surround sound system or the shrill voice of Tiffany on speakerphone had gone tomb quiet. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a bomb waiting to detonate. It started with the internet. On the morning of the third day, the high-speed fiber optic connection that Tiffany needed to upload her lifestyle vlogs simply vanished. I heard her screaming from the living room. She was rebooting the router, slamming it against the wall, cursing the service provider. Then the cable TV went black. Then the water pressure dropped to a trickle. By noon, the mail arrived. It was not the usual stack of catalogs and pre-approved credit offers. It was a single thick envelope from the bank addressed to Mr. Jamal Jefferson. I was sitting in my usual spot in the basement, wrapped in 2 blankets because the air had turned biting cold. I heard Jamal tear open the envelope upstairs. I heard the paper rip. And then I heard a sound that was half gasp, half sob. The letter was a formal notification. The primary account holder, the entity Jamal had always assumed was a blind trust or a corporate angel investor, had officially terminated all third-party beneficiary agreements. The gravy train hadn't just derailed. The tracks had been torn up. They panicked. It was a chaotic, flailing panic. I heard them running from room to room, checking appliances, checking faucets. The realization was hitting them in waves. They didn't pay for the water. They didn't pay for the electricity. They didn't pay for the gas. They didn't even pay for the security system that beeped an ominous low battery warning every 30 seconds. For 5 years, I had auto-paid every single bill from the main trust. They had never even seen a utility bill. They thought lights just turned on because they deserved it. Now the notices were flooding their inboxes on their phones, which were using data because the Wi-Fi was dead. Disconnection imminent, past due, service suspended. At dinner time, I walked up the stairs. My joints ached from the cold. The basement was essentially a refrigerator now. I walked into the kitchen, my stomach growling. The refrigerator was a massive stainless steel beast that cost $4,000. I reached for the handle. Tiffany was there in a flash. She slammed her hand against the door, blocking me. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her makeup patchy. She looked like a woman on the edge of a breakdown, and she was looking for someone to push over the edge with her. "Do not touch that," she snapped. I looked at her. "I am hungry, Tiffany," she laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Hungry. "We are all hungry, old man. Jamal is out trying to pawn his watch just to buy groceries because the accounts are still frozen. We have barely enough food for 2 days. I looked at the counter. There was a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, some apples. "I just want a slice of bread," I said. "No," she said, leaning into my face. Her breath smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. "You do not contribute, you do not eat. That is the new rule. If you cannot fix the bank, if you cannot pull your weight, you starve. No money, no food." She grabbed a piece of duct tape from the drawer and slapped it across the refrigerator door handles, sealing them shut. "This is ours," she hissed. "You want to eat? Go find a soup kitchen. Go beg on the corner. But you do not eat our food." I looked at her. I looked at the tape. I thought about the thousands of dollars of groceries I had paid for over the years, the organic produce, the imported cheeses, the wine. I turned to leave, but she wasn't done. "And another thing," she said, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper. I turned off the furnace for the basement zone. I stopped. "It is winter, Tiffany. It is 30 degrees outside. I know," she said, smiling for the first time in days. "But gas costs money, and we need to prioritize heat for the main floor. You have coats down there. Layer up. It will build character." She shooed me away like a stray dog. "Go on, get out of my kitchen." I walked back down the stairs. The air in the basement was already frigid. I could see my breath in the dim light of the single bulb. I sat on my cot and pulled the blankets up. My stomach cramped with hunger, a sharp, twisting pain. But I did not despair. They thought they were besieging me. They thought they were starving me out. They forgot that I was a union man. I had survived strikes that lasted months. I knew how to ration. I knew how to hide resources. I reached under the cot and pulled out my old rusted toolbox. It was heavy. Jamal had never touched it because he had never fixed a thing in his life. I opened the lid. Inside, nestled among the wrenches and screwdrivers, were 3 boxes of high-protein energy bars. I had bought them weeks ago, sensing the storm was coming. I also had 2 large jugs of water and a thermal flask. I unwrapped a bar quietly, the foil crinkling softly in the dark. I ate it slowly, chewing every bite thoroughly. It tasted like chocolate and grit. It tasted like survival. They were starving upstairs, fighting over scraps, terrified of the future. I was full. I was prepared. I waited until midnight. The house settled into an uneasy quiet. I could hear Jamal and Tiffany arguing in their bedroom, their voices muffled and venomous. They were blaming each other. They were turning on each other like rats in a trap. I put on my heavy wool coat and my cap. I moved the loose board in the corner of the basement that covered the old coal chute. It was a tight squeeze, but I kept fit. I climbed up the narrow tunnel and pushed open the metal hatch that led to the backyard. The night air was crisp and biting. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with freedom. I walked through the shadows of the garden I had paid to landscape, avoiding the motion sensor lights I knew were deactivated because of the power cuts. I walked 2 blocks to the corner of 4th and Elm. A dark sedan was waiting there, the engine idling quietly. I opened the passenger door and slid in. The heat in the car was blasting. It felt like heaven, Mr. Jefferson, the driver said. He was a young man, sharp-eyed, wearing a leather jacket. He was one of Ezekiel's best investigators. "Good evening, son," I said, rubbing my hands together to warm them. "Do you have it?" He reached into the back seat and handed me a thick manila envelope. We got everything he said. It was easier than we thought. She is not exactly careful. I opened the envelope. The interior light of the car illuminated the photographs. They were high resolution, grainy because they were taken at night but clear enough. There was Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, the woman who had just taped the refrigerator shut. She was walking into a Motel 6 on the outskirts of town. She wasn't alone. Walking beside her with his hand on the small of her back was a man I recognized instantly. It wasn't just a lover. It was worse. It was Marcus Thorne, Jamal's direct competitor. The man who had been trying to undercut Jamal's logistics contracts for 2 years. The man Jamal hated more than anyone in the business world. I flipped through the photos. Tiffany and Thorne at a bar. Tiffany handing Thorne a flash drive. Tiffany laughing while Thorne kissed her neck. The investigator cleared his throat. "It is not just an affair, Mr. Jefferson. We tracked her digital footprint. She has been selling him Jamal's client lists. She has been leaking bid information for months. She is getting paid in cash. That is how she affords the spa treatments that the trust didn't cover." I looked at the photo of Tiffany smiling at the enemy. She was selling her own husband out for pocket money. She was destroying his career from the inside while spending my money on the outside. My son was a fool. He was a cruel, entitled fool. But he was being played by a master. "Does Jamal know?" I asked. "No way," the investigator said. "He thinks Thorne is just lucky. He has no idea his wife is the leak." I put the photos back in the envelope. My hands were steady. The hunger was gone. The cold was gone. All I felt was the cold, hard weight of ammunition. "This is good work, son," I said. "What do you want to do with it?" he asked. "Should I send it to Jamal?" I shook my head. "No, not yet. Jamal is currently starving and freezing in a house he thinks he owns. If I give him this now, he might snap. I need him broken, not dead." I tucked the envelope inside my coat right next to my heart. "Keep watching her," I said. "I want to know every time she meets him. I want to know every dollar she takes." I got out of the car. The wind hit me, but I didn't flinch. I walked back to the house, slipping through the shadows like a ghost. I climbed back down the coal chute and into my freezing basement. I hid the envelope in the toolbox underneath the wrenches right next to the energy bars. I lay down on my cot and pulled the blankets up to my chin. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked. Tiffany was getting up to use the bathroom. I listened to her footsteps. I imagined her face when she realized that the old man in the basement knew her darkest secret. She had cut off my food. She had cut off my heat. She thought she was squeezing me. She didn't know that I was the one holding the knife, and I was just waiting for the right moment to cut the string that held her life together. 3 days down. The lights were flickering. The fridge was locked. The heat was gone. but the fire was just getting started. The morning sun did nothing to warm the house. The furnace had been dead for 24 hours, and the chill had settled into the drywall, turning the luxury home into an icebox. I sat in the corner of the living room wearing my wool coat and my beanie, watching my son pace back and forth. He was wearing his cashmere overcoat, rubbing his hands together, checking his watch every 30 seconds. He looked like a man waiting for a lifeboat on the Titanic. He had a plan. I could see it in the manic gleam of his eyes. He had whispered it to Tiffany in the kitchen while they drank cold instant coffee because the espresso machine wouldn't work without power. They were going to sell the house. They were going to liquidate the asset, take the cash, and run. They figured if they sold it quick, even at a loss, they could walk away with $500,000, enough to pay the dangerous debts, enough to start over, enough to dump me in the street. At 10 o'clock sharp, a silver Lexus pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out. He was slick. His suit was sharp, his hair was gelled, and he carried a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my first house. This was Marcus Thorne's favorite realtor, a man known for moving high-end properties fast and asking very few questions. Jamal opened the door before the man could even knock. "Mr. Henderson." Jamal boomed, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Welcome, welcome. Sorry about the chill. We are having the entire HVAC system upgraded to an eco-friendly smart unit. Top of the line." The realtor stepped inside, shivering slightly. He looked around the foyer, taking in the crystal chandelier and the marble floors. He didn't seem to notice that the lights were off. "Impressive," Henderson said, his eyes scanning the room like a calculator. "Very impressive structure. You said you wanted an expedited listing." "Yes," Jamal said, guiding him into the living room. He walked right past me as if I were a coat rack. "We have a sudden business opportunity in Europe. We need to relocate immediately. We are looking for a cash buyer. Fast close. We are willing to negotiate on the price." I sat still. I watched them. Tiffany came down the stairs wearing a fur coat over her designer jeans, trying to look like a wealthy wife rather than a woman whose credit cards had just been declined for a $3 latte. "This is my wife Tiffany," Jamal said. "And that over there is just my father. He stays with us. Do not mind him. He is a bit out of it." The realtor glanced at me. I gave him a small, vacant wave. He nodded dismissively and turned back to Jamal. "Let us look at the specs," Henderson said. Jamal led him on a tour. I trailed behind them, silent as a shadow. I listened as Jamal took credit for every renovation, every upgrade. "We put in these granite countertops last year," Jamal lied, running his hand over the stone I had paid for. "We imported this tile from Italy." The realtor nodded, tapping notes into his tablet. "The value is definitely here, Mr. Jefferson. Ideally, in this market, we could list at $1.2 million. If you want a cash close in under 2 weeks, we might have to drop to $900,000. "Do it," Jamal said quickly. "Too quickly. 900 is fine, just get it done." Tiffany's eyes lit up. $900,000. She was already spending it in her head. She was imagining the new clothes, the new apartment, the freedom from the old man in the basement. They sat down at the dining room table, the same table where I had been served cold leftovers. The realtor opened his portfolio and pulled out a stack of contracts. "I just need to verify the ownership details before we sign the listing agreement," Henderson said. "Do you have the deed handy, or a copy of the title?" Jamal laughed. It was a confident, arrogant sound. "Of course. I have everything right here." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a file. It was a photocopy of the original title transfer from 5 years ago. He slid it across the table with a flourish. "There you go. Clean title, no liens." Henderson picked up the paper. He adjusted his glasses. He read the document. Then he frowned. He stopped tapping on his tablet and looked up at Jamal. He looked confused. "Mr. Jefferson," he said slowly, "this is a copy of a transfer document, yes. But I am looking at the county assessor's database right now to pull the digital deed." Jamal waved his hand. "It is the same thing. Just standard paperwork." Henderson turned the tablet around so Jamal could see the screen. "Sir, the name on the digital deed is not Jamal Jefferson." Jamal blinked. "What? That is impossible. I have lived here for 5 years. I pay the taxes. Well, the trust pays the taxes, but it is my house. The name on the deed," Henderson continued, his voice losing some of its warmth, "is listed as Jefferson Holdings, LLC. There was a silence in the room. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. Jefferson Holdings, LLC. Tiffany asked, her voice shrill. "What is that?" Jamal laughed again, but this time it sounded nervous. It sounded wet. "Oh, that. he said, leaning back in his chair, trying to look relaxed. That is just the corporate shell. You know how it is. Tax purposes. Liability protection. It is a holding company set up by my in-laws. He pointed at Tiffany. Her parents set it up for us when we got married. It is basically me. I am the managing partner. I have full authorization. I watched him lie. It was breathtaking. He lied with such ease, such conviction. He truly believed that if he said it confidently enough, reality would bend to his will. He assumed that because the money had always flowed, the ownership was just a technicality he could smooth talk his way around. Henderson looked at Tiffany. Is that correct, Mrs. Jefferson? Your parents own the LLC. Tiffany hesitated. She looked at Jamal. He stared at her with wide, desperate eyes, willing her to play along. Yes, she lied. My father, he put it in a company name for privacy. But it is our house. We can sell it. Henderson tapped his pen on the table. He looked skeptical. Real estate agents smell desperation like sharks smell blood. And right now, the water was full of it. I see, Henderson said. Well, that complicates things slightly. I cannot list a property based on a verbal assurance. I need the articles of incorporation for Jefferson Holdings LLC. I need a resolution from the board of directors authorizing the sale. And I need the signature of the registered agent. Jamal's smile froze. He didn't have any of those things. He didn't even know they existed. I can get those, Jamal stammered. I need to call their lawyer. It might take a day or two. Henderson stood up. He packed his tablet away. He buttoned his jacket. Well, when you have those documents, give me a call, Jamal. Until then, my hands are tied. I cannot sell a house you do not legally own. But we do own it, Jamal shouted, standing up too fast. His chair scraped against the floor. It is my house. My name is on the mail. Henderson gave him a pitying look. A name on a utility bill is not a name on a deed, son. Get me the authorization from the LLC. The realtor walked to the door. Jamal followed him, pleading, bargaining, offering a higher commission. Tiffany sat at the table, staring at the photocopy of the deed, her face pale. I sat in my corner. I watched the door close. I heard the Lexus drive away. Jamal came back into the room. He was shaking. He looked at Tiffany. He looked at the walls of the house that he thought was his fortress. Who the hell is Jefferson Holdings, LLC? He whispered. Tiffany looked up. You said it was your trust. You said it was your money. I thought it was. Jamal yelled. I thought the company just managed the funds. I didn't know they held the title. He turned to me. He saw me watching him. He saw the old man in the beanie sitting in the dark. Do you know anything about this? He demanded, marching over to me. Jefferson Holdings. Did Mom set that up? Was it some insurance thing? I looked up at him. I kept my face blank, my eyes wide and confused. I don't know any holdings, son, I mumbled. I just know this is a nice house. Are we moving? Jamal groaned. He kicked the wall. He punched the door frame. We are trapped, he hissed to Tiffany. We cannot sell it. We cannot mortgage it. We don't own it. We are squatters in our own home. Tiffany began to cry. It was a jagged, ugly sound. We have to find out who runs that LLC. Jamal said, pacing the room. We have to find the registered agent. It has to be someone we know. Maybe it is your dad, Tiff. Maybe he did it and forgot to tell us. My dad is broke, Jamal. Tiffany screamed. He drives a Honda Civic. He doesn't have a holding company. Then who? Jamal whispered. Who owns us? I looked down at my hands, my calloused, scarred hands. The hands that had signed the incorporation papers for Jefferson Holdings LLC 30 years ago in a dusty office in downtown Detroit. The hands that signed the checks. The hands that held the keys. They were looking for a ghost. They were looking for a corporate overlord. They were looking for a savior or a villain. They didn't realize he was sitting 3 feet away wearing a coat from Goodwill, watching them drown in a puddle of their own ignorance. I am Jefferson Holdings, I said inside my head, and the rent is due. Jamal grabbed his hair. He looked like he was going to be sick. We have to find the paperwork, he said. It has to be in the office. I must have missed a file. He ran upstairs. Tiffany followed him. I heard them tearing apart the home office, throwing papers, overturning file cabinets. They were hunting for a piece of paper that would save them. I stood up slowly. My knees popped. I walked to the window and looked out at the gray, cold afternoon. They wouldn't find the papers. The papers were in a safety deposit box at the credit union, the one where I banked my $800. I watched a squirrel run across the frozen lawn. It stopped and looked at me. It seemed to know something. You are safe, little one, I thought. You gathered your nuts. You prepared for winter. My son, he spent his summer singing, and now the snow is here. I turned back to the empty room. The cold was getting worse. I could see my breath clearly now. It was time to turn up the heat, metaphorically speaking. I reached into my pocket and touched the phone. I sent a single text to Ezekiel. They know about the LLC. They are panicking. Proceed to phase 3. The reply came back instantly. Copy that. The power company just flagged the account for meter tampering. They are sending a truck to pull the meter in an hour. I smiled. Meter tampering. Jamal must have tried to bypass the smart meter to get the heat back on. He was desperate. He was sloppy. And now he was a criminal. The house wasn't just cold. It was about to become a crime scene. I sat back down and waited. I had a front row seat to the collapse of an empire built on sand, and I intended to watch every single second of it. The cold in the house had become a physical presence, a fourth roommate that sat on our chests and stole our breath. It was day 4 of the blackout. The food was gone. The water was running a rusty brown trickle. Jamal and Tiffany were huddled in the living room under a pile of designer throw blankets, shivering in their expensive coats. I sat in the kitchen, my hands wrapped around my thermal flask of water, listening. I knew they were at the breaking point. Hunger does strange things to people who have never felt it before. It strips away the veneer of civilization. It turns men into animals and women into predators. I heard Tiffany's voice. It was low, raspy, and filled with a darkness that made the hair on my arms stand up. We are out of options, Jamal, she whispered. We cannot sell the house because of the LLC. We cannot use the cards. We cannot borrow money because your credit score just tanked to 0. I know, Jamal snapped, his teeth chattering. I know, Tiff. What do you want me to do, rob a liquor store? No, she said. Her voice dropped even lower. I had to strain to hear her. We have an asset, Jamal. A liability that can be turned into an asset. Who? Jamal asked. Him, she said. The old man. I sat very still. He has Social Security, Tiffany said. He has Medicare. And if he is declared incompetent, if he is committed to a state facility, the state pays a stipend to the legal guardian. It is not much, but it is steady. And once he is in the system, once he is gone... She paused. The silence was heavy. What? Jamal asked. There are markets, Jamal, she murmured. Medical markets, research, transplants, an old man, healthy organs. Even at his age, a kidney is worth 10 grand on the gray market. A liver is worth more. If he dies in state care, who investigates? Who cares? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. They were discussing my dissection. They were weighing my flesh against their debts. My daughter-in-law, the woman who posted Bible verses on Facebook, was contemplating selling me for parts. Jamal was silent for a long time. I waited for him to scream. I waited for him to tell her she was insane. I waited for the son I raised to stand up. How do we do it? Jamal whispered. The words broke something inside me that I didn't know was still whole. We need a doctor, Tiffany said, her voice gaining strength. Not a real doctor, a fixer. I know a guy. Dr. Thorne. He lost his license in Ohio for overprescribing opioids, but he is licensed here as a geriatric psychologist. For $500, he will sign anything. $500, Jamal asked. We don't have $5. I pawned my wedding ring this morning, Tiffany said coldly. While you were crying in the bathroom, I got $600 for it. It is enough. Call him, Jamal said. I sat in the kitchen staring at my hands. They were trembling not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like white heat. They were going to sell me. They were going to lock me away in a padded room and strip me for parts like a stolen car. I stood up slowly. I walked to the basement door. I did not confront them. I did not scream. I went down to my cold, dark room, and I prepared for the performance of my life. 2 hours later, a car pulled into the driveway. It was a rusted sedan that sounded like it was coughing up a lung. I heard the heavy footsteps of a large man coming up the walk. The front door opened. Dr. Thorne had arrived. I was sitting in the living room when they brought him in. I was wearing my oldest sweater, the one with the moth holes. I stared blankly at the wall, letting my mouth hang open slightly. Dr. Thorne was a sweating, heavyset man in a suit that was too tight and stained with coffee. He smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap cologne. He carried a briefcase that looked like it had been chewed by a dog. "This is him?" Thorne asked, looking at me with disdain. "Yes," Tiffany said. She was hovering behind him, wringing her hands. "As you can see, he is completely gone. He doesn't know what day it is. He gets violent. He forgets who we are. It is unsafe, doctor. We just want him to get the help he needs." Thorne nodded, pulling a clipboard out of his briefcase. He didn't even look at her. He looked at me like a butcher looking at a side of beef. "All right, old-timer," Thorne grunted, pulling up a chair. He sat too close. His breath was foul. "Let us have a little chat." I turned my head slowly. I blinked my eyes rapidly like a confused owl. "Who are you?" I rasped. "Are you the milkman?" Thorne smirked. He looked at Jamal. "Yeah, he is cooked. Level 3, dementia easy. Just ask the questions." Jamal said nervously. He was standing by the window, refusing to look at me. "Just make it official." Thorne clicked his pen. "Okay, Mr. Jefferson. Can you tell me what year it is?" I looked at the ceiling. I looked at the floor. I let a line of drool escape the corner of my mouth. "It is 1972, I whispered. "The union is striking. We have to hold the line." Thorne scribbled on his pad. "Disoriented to time. Stuck in past trauma." "Okay," he said. "Who is the President of the United States?" I looked him dead in the eye. The fog in my gaze cleared for just a second. It was a calculated slip. "The President is a man who pays his taxes." "Dr. Thorne?" I said, my voice suddenly sharp and clear. "Unlike you. I believe the Ohio Medical Board revoked your license in 2018 for fraud and patient negligence. Did you ever pay that $50,000 fine, or are you still dodging the summons?" Thorne froze. His pen stopped moving. The smirk vanished from his face. He stared at me, his eyes widening. Tiffany gasped. Jamal turned around, his mouth open. "What did you say?" Thorne whispered. I leaned forward. I dropped the act completely. I said, "Are you practicing medicine across state lines with a revoked license clearance? Because that is a felony. And if you sign that paper, you are adding conspiracy to commit fraud to your rap sheet." Thorne stood up so fast his chair tipped over. He backed away from me. "You said he was senile," Thorne shouted at Tiffany. "You said he was a vegetable." "He is!" Tiffany shrieked. "He is crazy. He is making it up." "He knows my middle name," Thorne yelled. "He knows about Ohio." I smiled. It was a cold, wolfish smile. "I know a lot of things, Clarence," I said. "I know you parked your car in a red zone outside. I know you charged them $500 for this consultation. And I know that if you walk out that door right now, you might make it to the state line before the police catch up with you." Thorne looked at me. He looked at the terrified couple. He looked at the $500 cash that Tiffany had placed on the table. Greed is a powerful thing. It overrides fear. It overrides logic. Thorne looked at the money. He snatched it up and stuffed it into his pocket. He picked up the clipboard. He scribbled his signature at the bottom of the page violently. "He is crazy as a loon," Thorne declared, his voice shaking. "Paranoia, delusions of grandeur, aggressive behavior. I am certifying him. Level 3 dementia, immediate institutionalization recommended." He threw the paper at Jamal. "There, you got your paper. I am out of here. Do not call me again." Thorne ran for the door. He slammed it behind him. We heard his car engine sputter and roar as he sped away. The room was silent. The paper lay on the floor at Jamal's feet. Tiffany walked over and picked it up. She looked at it. She smiled. It was a terrifying, triumphant smile. "It doesn't matter what he said," she whispered. "We have the signature. It is official. You are legally incompetent, Otis." She held the paper up like a trophy. "Tomorrow morning the van comes, and you are going away forever." I looked at her. I looked at my son. He was pale, sweating, but he nodded. "It is for the best, Dad," Jamal mumbled. You threatened the doctor. You are clearly unwell. We are doing this to help you." "To help me," I repeated. "Yes," Tiffany said. She walked over to the basement door and opened it. "Go back downstairs, Otis. Pack your things. Or don't. You won't need them where you are going. They give you a gown." She pointed to the dark stairs. "Get out of my sight." I stood up. I walked past them. I looked Jamal in the eye. "You are making a mistake, son," I said. "Go downstairs." Jamal shouted, his voice cracking. "Just go." I walked down the stairs. I heard the door slam shut behind me. Then I heard the sound of a heavy deadbolt sliding into place. They had locked me in. I stood in the darkness of the basement. I listened to their footsteps walking away. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought the piece of paper signed by a fugitive doctor was their golden ticket. They didn't know that Dr. Thorne's visit was the final nail in their coffin. I had recorded the entire interaction on my phone in my pocket. I had his voice accepting the bribe. I had his voice admitting his fraud. And I had Tiffany and Jamal conspiring with him. I walked over to my cot and sat down. I pulled out my phone. I sent the audio file to Ezekiel. Evidence secured, I typed. Thorne signed the fraudulent committal papers. They locked me in the basement. The reply came back in seconds. Police and Adult Protective Services are briefed. We move at dawn. Are you ready? I looked around my cold, damp prison. I looked at the locked door. I am ready. I typed. I lay back on the cot. I wasn't afraid. I was relieved. The charade was over. Tomorrow the hammer would fall. But tonight I had work to do. They had locked the door, but they forgot about the hinges. And they forgot that this was my house. I knew secrets about this building that they had never bothered to learn. I waited until the house was silent. I waited until I heard their breathing slow into sleep. Then I got to work. I had a date with a computer upstairs, and I needed to get the final piece of evidence that would send my son to prison for a very long time. He wanted to sell my organs. I was about to gut his entire life. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was heavy and final, like the closing of a coffin lid. I stood on the other side of the door, listening to my son's breathing on the landing. It was ragged, shallow. He was terrified, but he was committed. "The van comes at 8, Jamal said through the wood. His voice was muffled, but the malice was clear. "Do not make a scene, Dad. Just go. It is better this way." I heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. I heard the door to the master bedroom close. Then silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that filled the cold basement. I walked back to my cot and sat down. I looked at the door. It was a solid oak door, one of the upgrades I had paid for 3 years ago when they remodeled. Jamal thought a deadbolt was enough to hold me. He thought a piece of metal and a thick frame could contain a man who had spent 40 years fixing blast furnaces and hydraulic presses. He forgot that I taught him how to use a screwdriver. He forgot that I was the one who hung that door. And he forgot the most important rule of carpentry. A lock only works if the hinges are on the inside. I waited. I sat in the dark, my breath misting in the freezing air, and I waited for the house to fall asleep. I checked my watch. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. The house settled. The rhythmic creaking of the floorboards above me stopped. They were asleep. They were dreaming of the money they would get for my organs. They were dreaming of the wine cellar. I reached under my cot and pulled out the toolbox. It slid across the concrete with a soft scrape. I opened it and took out a flathead screwdriver and a small hammer. I walked to the door. I moved silently, my socks sliding over the cold floor. I located the hinges. There were 3 of them painted over with white gloss, but the pins were accessible. I placed the tip of the screwdriver at the bottom of the lowest pin. I tapped the handle gently with the hammer. Tap, tap. The paint cracked. The pin moved. I worked slowly. I couldn't risk a loud noise. I eased the pin up millimeter by millimeter until I could grip it with my fingers and pull it free. It came out with a faint metallic sigh. 1 down. I moved to the middle hinge, then the top. It took me 20 minutes. My hands were steady. My heart was a slow, rhythmic drumbeat. I wasn't escaping a prison. I was breaking out of the cage to hunt the zookeeper. When the last pin was out, I gripped the door handle. I pulled the door toward the hinge side, leveraging it out of the frame. It was heavy, but I still had the strength of a steelworker in my shoulders. The door swung free, the deadbolt still locked, the tongue of the lock hanging uselessly in the air. I set the door gently against the wall. The stairs were open. I climbed them slowly, testing each step for squeaks. I knew this house better than the architect. I knew which boards groaned and which were silent. I moved like a shadow, a ghost haunting the life I had paid for. I reached the hallway. The air up here was warmer, though still chilly. The moonlight streamed through the windows, casting long, pale shapes on the floor. I walked past the master bedroom. I could hear Jamal snoring. It was a fitful, anxious sound. He was sleeping next to a woman who was selling his secrets to his enemy, and he had locked his only ally in the basement. I didn't go to the front door. I wasn't leaving. I turned left and walked into the study. Jamal's home office was a shrine to his ego. He had framed certificates on the wall awards for Salesman of the Month that I knew were participation trophies given to everyone in the department. He had a mahogany desk that cost $4,000. He had a leather chair that looked like a throne, and on the desk sat his computer, a high-end desktop with 3 monitors. I sat in his chair. It was comfortable. It felt like power. I woke the computer. The screens flared to life, bathing the room in a harsh blue glow. It asked for a password. I looked at the hint. Success. I almost laughed. I typed in the only thing Jamal cared about. I typed in the date of his first big commission check. Nothing. I tried his wedding anniversary. Incorrect. I tried his own birthday. Incorrect. Then I paused. I thought about the man my son had become. Vain. Insecure. Obsessed with status. I typed in Porsche 911. Access granted. The desktop opened. I was in. I didn't waste time looking at his browser history or his emails to Tiffany. I went straight to the work folders. I knew exactly what I was looking for. You see, Jamal worked for Titan Logistics. He was the regional sales director. He thought he got the job because of his charm and his business degree. He didn't know that Titan Logistics was founded by my best friend Frank the Hammer Miller, a man I had walked picket lines with for 20 years. And he certainly didn't know that when Frank started the company, I put up the seed money. I owned 40% of Titan Logistics. I was the silent partner. I was the reason Jamal wasn't fired 5 years ago for incompetence. I opened the folder labeled Invoices 2023. I started scrolling. I was looking for patterns. I was looking for the bleed. It didn't take long. Jamal was sloppy. He was arrogant. He thought no one was watching. I found a series of invoices to a vendor called JJ Consulting. $5,000 a month for market analysis. I checked the vendor address. It was a P.O. box in a strip mall 3 towns over. I found another set of invoices for client entertainment, dinners at restaurants that didn't exist, golf outings on days when it was snowing. I pulled a flash drive from my pocket. It was a small silver thing attached to my keychain. I plugged it into the USB port. I started copying, folder after folder, PDF after PDF. The evidence was staggering. He wasn't just skimming off the top. He was funneling massive amounts of company money into his own pockets to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford even with my allowance. He was stealing from the company. He was stealing from Frank. He was stealing from me. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. 50%. 70%. I looked at the photo on his desk. It was Jamal shaking hands with the CEO, a man hired by the board to run day-to-day operations. Jamal looked so proud. He looked like he owned the world. He didn't know that the man who actually owned 40% of that world was sitting in his chair downloading the warrant for his arrest. 90%. I heard a noise in the hallway. A floorboard creaked. I froze. My hand hovered over the mouse. Jamal? Tiffany's voice called out, sleepy and irritated. Are you working? I held my breath. I stared at the door. If she came in, if she saw me, the game was over. It would become a physical confrontation, and I was an old man against 2 desperate people. Jamal, she called again. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The progress bar hit 100%. Complete. I yanked the drive out. The screen was still glowing. I heard footsteps approaching the door. I slid out of the chair and crouched behind the massive mahogany desk. My knees popped loudly. The door handle turned. The door opened. Jamal? Tiffany stepped into the room. I could see her bare feet on the carpet. She walked toward the desk. She saw the computer screens awake, glowing blue in the dark room. Why is this on? She muttered. She reached out and wiggled the mouse. The screensaver deactivated, revealing the desktop. She stood there for a moment, confused. Then she shrugged. She turned off the monitors. Idiot, she whispered. Leaves everything on. She turned and walked out, closing the door behind her. I let out a breath that I felt I had been holding for an hour. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited 10 minutes. I waited until I was sure she was back in bed. Then I stood up. I put the flash drive in my pocket. It felt heavy hot against my leg. It was the nail in the coffin. I crept back out into the hall. I went down the stairs moving with the silence of a man who has nothing left to lose. I went back into the basement. I lifted the heavy oak door and fitted it back into the frame. I tapped the hinge pins back into place with the handle of the screwdriver. I wiped away the paint chips. It looked untouched. It looked like a solid locked barrier. I sat down on my cot. I hid the flash drive inside the hollow leg of the metal bed frame. The van was coming at 8. Jamal thought he was sending a helpless old man to his doom. He didn't know that I had just spent the night signing his termination papers. I lay down and closed my eyes. I didn't sleep. I visualized the morning. I visualized the look on his face when he realized that the father he tried to bury was actually the judge, the jury, and the executioner. The sun would be up soon. And, with it, the reckoning. 8 o'clock in the morning arrived with the rumble of a diesel engine that sounded like a death rattle. I was sitting on my cot, fully dressed. I had spent the last hour of darkness preparing. I had retrieved the garment bag I had taped behind the water heater 3 years ago, a hiding place Jamal never knew existed, because he never checked the pilot light. I stripped off my moth-eaten sweater and my stained trousers. I put on the charcoal gray bespoke suit I had commissioned in London 20 years ago. It was a little loose in the waist now, but the shoulders still fit the frame of a man who had carried the weight of 1,000 workers. I tied my silk tie in a perfect Windsor knot in the reflection of the basement window. I put my old tattered wool coat over it, buttoning it all the way to the chin to hide the armor beneath. The heavy oak door at the top of the stairs unlatched. Jamal didn't knock. He didn't call out. He just swung the door open and stood there silhouetted by the gray morning light of the hallway. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin sallow from the cold and the stress. He looked like a man who was about to do something unforgivable and was trying to convince himself it was necessary. "It is time, Dad," he said. His voice was flat dead. "The van is here." I stood up. I picked up my hat. I didn't say a word. I walked up the stairs, my steps heavy and deliberate. I walked past my son. He flinched as I passed him, pressing his back against the wall as if he were afraid I might contaminate him. We walked into the living room. The front door was open. The cold air rushed in, but the house was already freezing, so it didn't make much difference. 2 men were waiting in the foyer. They were enormous. They wore white scrubs that were stained at the armpits. They didn't look like medical professionals. They looked like bouncers who had been fired from a dive bar for being too rough. One of them was chewing gum with his mouth open. The package?" the chewer asked, looking me up and down. "Yes," Jamal whispered. "This is him, Mr. Otis Jefferson. He can be combative." The second orderly stepped forward. He pulled a pair of restraints from his belt. "Zip ties. Not medical restraints. Industrial plastic zip ties. We don't want any trouble, Pops." The orderly grunted. "You come quiet or we make you quiet. Doctor's orders." I looked at them. I looked at Jamal. He was staring at the floor. "I will walk," I said. The orderly laughed. "Sure you will." He grabbed my arm. His grip was bruising. He didn't guide me. He yanked me. They dragged me out onto the front porch. The morning sun was bright, blindingly white against the frost on the lawn. The neighborhood was awake. I saw curtains twitching in the houses across the street. Mrs. Gable was standing on her porch in her bathrobe, her hand over her mouth. Mr. Henderson, who walked his dog at this time every day, had stopped on the sidewalk watching with wide eyes. Tiffany was standing by the railing of the porch. She was wearing her fur coat and sunglasses, holding a mug of cold water because the kettle wouldn't work. She looked like a widow at a funeral who was trying not to smile. "Goodbye, Otis," she called out, her voice bright and brittle. "Be good. We will come visit you on Sundays." She waved. It was a small, dismissive flutter of her fingers. A queen banishing a peasant. Dr. Thorne was there too. He was leaning against his rusted sedan parked in the driveway, smoking a cigarette. He had come to ensure the transfer happened, to make sure his liability was loaded into the van and driven away before he collected the rest of his bribe. He caught my eye and smirked, blowing smoke into the cold air. "Get him in the van," Thorne barked at the orderlies. "I have a tea time at 10. The orderlies shoved me down the steps. I stumbled, but I didn't fall. They marched me toward the white van parked at the curb. It had no windows in the back. It looked like a cage on wheels. The neighbors were whispering now. I could hear the buzz of their judgment. They saw a confused old man being taken away by his loving family. They saw a tragedy. They didn't see the crime. I reached the back of the van. The orderly opened the doors. The interior was dark, lined with metal benches. There were shackles bolted to the floor. "Get in," the chewer said, shoving me from behind. I planted my feet. I took a deep breath. I felt the USB drive in my pocket. I felt the weight of 40 years of history. "Move it, old man," the orderly shouted, raising his hand to strike me. And then the world exploded with noise. It wasn't an explosion. It was an engine roar, a deep guttural thrum that vibrated in the pavement. A black SUV tore around the corner, its tires screeching. Then another and another. A convoy of 4 Obsidian Lincoln Navigators with tinted windows swarmed the street, blocking the white van, blocking the driveway, blocking the entire world. They screeched to a halt. The doors flew open in unison. Men in dark suits spilled out. They didn't move like bouncers. They moved like soldiers. They moved with the precision of men who carried badges and guns. At the center of the formation, the door of the lead SUV opened. Ezekiel stepped out. He was wearing a camel hair trench coat over a 3-piece suit. He held a briefcase in one hand and a cane in the other, not for walking, but for pointing. He looked like a Judgment Day prophet who had passed the bar exam. Next to him stepped out a man in a uniform, Sheriff Miller, the actual sheriff of the county, not a deputy. A man I had helped get elected 10 years ago, a man who hated elder abuse more than he hated tax fraud. Jamal ran down the porch steps. "Who are you?" Jamal screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "What is this?" "This is private property." Sheriff Miller ignored him. He walked straight toward Dr. Thorne. Thorne dropped his cigarette. He looked like he wanted to run, but 2 deputies were already flanking him. "Clarence Thorne." Sheriff Miller boomed. Thorne stammered. I am just consulting. I am leaving." "You are not going anywhere," the sheriff said. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal glinted in the sun. "You are under arrest for medical fraud, forgery of state documents, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping." "Kidnapping." Tiffany shrieked from the porch. She dropped her mug. It shattered on the concrete. "We are not kidnapping anyone. We are taking care of him." Ezekiel walked toward the van. The orderlies saw him coming. They saw the deputies behind him. They saw the look in his eyes. They let go of my arms and stepped back, raising their hands in the air. Ezekiel stopped in front of me. He looked at the white van. He looked at the zip ties in the orderly's hand. Then he looked at me. He smiled. It was a small, grim smile. "Right on time, Mr. Jefferson." "Right on time, Zeke," I said. Ezekiel turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff, take custody of the doctor. We have the audio recording of the conspiracy sent to your office this morning. It matches the voice patterns perfectly." "I didn't do it," Thorne yelled as the deputies slammed him against the hood of his rusted car. "They made me. They paid me." He pointed a shaking finger at Jamal. "Him, the son. He gave me 50 grand to sign the papers. He said the old man was a nuisance." Jamal froze. He looked at Thorne. He looked at the sheriff. He looked at the neighbors who were now standing on their lawns, phones out, recording everything. "That is a lie," Jamal shouted. "He is lying." The sheriff turned to Jamal. "We will see about that, son. Right now, I suggest you shut your mouth." I stood there by the open doors of the van. The orderly who had shoved me was trembling. He was realizing that he had just put his hands on a man who could summon a sheriff with a phone call. I reached up to my chin. My hands were steady. I undid the top button of my old frayed wool coat. Then the next, and the next. I shrugged the coat off my shoulders. It fell to the dirty pavement, landing in a puddle of melting frost. Underneath, the charcoal suit caught the morning light. The silk tie was perfectly centered. The fabric was immaculate. I shot my cuffs, revealing the gold cufflinks that had been a gift from the mayor in '95. I looked at the orderly. He was staring at the suit. He was staring at the man inside the suit. He wasn't looking at a confused geriatric patient anymore. He was looking at Otis Jefferson, the chairman. I stepped toward him. He flinched. I reached out and brushed a speck of imaginary dust from my lapel. I looked him dead in the eye. My voice was low, but it carried across the silent street. "Get your filthy hands off my $3,000 suit," I said. The orderly swallowed hard. I didn't know, sir. You were just following orders," I finished for him. "I know. That is what they always say. Now get your van off my street before I have it impounded for parking violations." The orderly scrambled into the driver's seat. His partner jumped in the passenger side. The van reversed so fast it almost hit one of the SUVs, then sped away down the block. I turned to face the house. Jamal was standing at the bottom of the driveway. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a window and was waiting for the belt. Tiffany was clutching the porch railing, her knuckles white. I began to walk toward them. Ezekiel walked beside me. The sheriff fell in behind us. The neighbors watched. They saw the old man they had pitied transform. They saw the posture straighten. They saw the stride lengthen. I walked up the driveway, my shoes clicking on the asphalt. I stopped 3 feet from Jamal. He looked at my suit. He looked at the cufflinks. He looked at my face. "Dad," he whispered. What is happening?" I didn't answer him. I walked past him. I walked up the stairs to the porch. I stopped in front of Tiffany. She was trembling. Her sunglasses had slid down her nose. She looked at Ezekiel, then at me. "Who are these people, Otis?" she asked, her voice shaking. I turned to face the yard. I looked at the sheriff, who was currently reading Dr. Thorne his rights. I looked at Jamal, who was staring at the ground. Then I looked at Ezekiel. "Give them the news, Zeke," I said. Ezekiel stepped forward. He opened his briefcase. He pulled out a document with a red seal. "Mr. Jamal Jefferson, Mrs. Tiffany Jefferson." He handed the paper to Jamal. Jamal took it with shaking hands. "What is this?" Jamal asked. "This is an immediate eviction notice," Ezekiel said loud enough for Mrs. Gable to hear across the street. "You are trespassing on property owned by Jefferson Holdings, LLC. The owner of said company has terminated your residency effective immediately." Jamal looked up from the paper. He looked at me. His eyes were full of confusion and horror. "The owner," Jamal whispered. "You know the owner?" I looked at my son. I saw the realization starting to dawn on him. I saw the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The trust, the holding company, the connections, the suit. I stepped closer to him. I leaned in so only he could hear me. "Hello, Jamal," I said. "I am the owner. I am the board. I am the bank." Jamal's knees buckled. He actually staggered back. "You," he gasped. But you are broke. You are—" "I am the man who paid for your life," I said, "and now I am the man who is taking it back." I turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff," I said, "I believe there is a computer in the upstairs office that contains evidence of corporate embezzlement involving Titan Logistics. I would like to grant you permission to seize it." Jamal let out a sound that was like a wounded animal. "No." "Yes," I said. I looked at Tiffany. "And while you are up there, Sheriff, you might want to check the lady's purse. I believe you will find a flash drive containing trade secrets she has been selling to Marcus Thorne." Tiffany screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of absolute terror. The game was over. The board was flipped, and the king had just stepped out of the shadows. "Dad, what is going on?" Jamal whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind rustling the dead leaves on the lawn. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he did not see the old man who fixed the toaster or the man who drove a beat-up sedan. He saw the charcoal suit. He saw the way the sheriff stood deferentially behind me. He saw the stranger who had been living in his basement. I did not answer him immediately. I let the question hang in the cold air. I let him look at the cufflinks on my wrists, the ones he had never noticed before because he never looked past the fraying cuffs of my old sweaters. "You asked who owns this house," I said, my voice calm and level. "You asked where the money comes from. You asked who holds the keys to the kingdom you have been living in." Jamal shook his head slowly, his eyes darting back and forth between Ezekiel and me. "It does not make sense," he stammered. "You are retired. You were a union rep. Dad, you made $40,000 a year. I saw your pay stubs. I saw them. You saw what I wanted you to see," I replied. "I showed you the salary of a working man because I wanted you to respect the work, not the wealth. But you never respected the work, did you, Jamal? You only respected the check." Just then, the rear door of the second black Lincoln Navigator opened. The sound of the heavy latch clicking was sharp and precise. A man stepped out. He was tall, silver-haired, and wearing a navy blue suit that cost more than the car Dr. Thorne drove. He carried himself with the easy grace of a man who controlled boardrooms with a whisper. Jamal turned, and his eyes widened. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like gray ash. "Mr. Sterling," he gasped. It was David Sterling, the chief executive officer of Titan Logistics, the man Jamal called boss, the man Jamal tried to emulate in every way from his haircut to his shoe brand, the man Jamal thought was the pinnacle of success. Jamal took a step forward, his hands trembling. "Mr. Sterling, thank God you are here. This is a nightmare. There has been a mistake. My father, he is confused. He is causing a scene. You have to help me. These people..." They are trespassing. David Sterling did not look at Jamal. He did not even acknowledge his regional sales director existed. He walked up the driveway, his eyes fixed on the porch. He walked past the sheriff. He walked past Ezekiel. He stopped 3 feet in front of me. The neighborhood watched in silence. Mrs. Gable across the street had put down her coffee mug. The world seemed to stop. David Sterling, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar logistics empire, bowed his head. It was not a nod. It was a formal, respectful bow. "Good morning, Chairman Jefferson," David said, his voice clear and respectful. "I apologize for the delay. The audit took longer than expected." Jamal made a sound like he had been punched in the throat. He staggered back, hitting the fender of the sheriff's cruiser. "Chairman," he whispered. "Chairman Jefferson." I looked at David. I nodded. "Thank you, David. I trust the board is aware of the situation." "They are fully briefed, sir," David replied, straightening up. "We convened an emergency session at 4 a.m. per your instructions. The vote was unanimous." Jamal looked from David to me and back again. His brain was trying to process information that contradicted his entire reality. It was like watching a computer crash. "Dad," Jamal said, his voice high and thin, "why is he calling you chairman? You don't work for Titan." I looked at my son. I felt a deep, profound sadness. I had hidden this from him to protect him from his own greed, but in the end the secrecy had only allowed the rot to grow in the dark. "I do not work for Titan, Jamal," I said. "I am Titan." Jamal shook his head violently. No, that is a lie. The majority shareholder is a holding company. O.J. Jefferson Ventures. I saw the org chart. It is some white guy, some investor from New York. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my wallet. I didn't pull out the $5 bill this time. I pulled out my driver's license. I held it up so he could read the name. "Otis James Jefferson," I read aloud. O.J. Jefferson. Jamal stared at the card. "I founded Titan Logistics 30 years ago with Frank Miller," I said. "Frank was the face. He liked the spotlight. He liked the handshakes. I was the money. I was the strategy. I stayed in the shadows because in my line of work back then, having money put a target on your back. I wanted to build something that would last. Something for you." I put the license away. "I own 40% of the company, Jamal. I sit at the head of the table. I hired David. I approved your hiring 5 years ago, even though your resume was thin because I thought you needed a chance. I approved your bonuses. I approved your expense account. I built the floor you walk on." Jamal looked at me with horror. It wasn't the horror of a man who realized he had made a mistake. It was the horror of a man who realized he had been biting the hand of God. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew everything, every meeting, every deal. I knew everything," I confirmed. "I read the reports. I saw the numbers, and for a long time I was proud. You were selling. You were growing. I thought you were becoming the man I hoped you would be." I paused. I looked at the flash drive that was now in the sheriff's pocket, but then the numbers stopped adding up. Jamal. David stepped forward. He opened his leather portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was heavy bond paper with the Titan Logistics letterhead at the top. "Mr. Jamal Jefferson," David said, his voice shifting from respectful to icy cold. "Effective immediately. Your employment with Titan Logistics is terminated with cause." "Terminated," Jamal choked out. "You can't. I am the regional director. I have the best numbers in the quarter." "Your numbers are fabricated," David said, cutting him off. Jamal flinched. "We reviewed the files on your computer this morning," David continued. "The files your father secured last night. We cross-referenced your vendor list with the state registry. JJ Consulting does not exist, Jamal. It is a shell company registered to a P.O. box that you pay for. You have been invoicing the company for market research that was never conducted and funneling the payments into your private gambling accounts." Jamal looked at Tiffany. She was standing by the porch railing, staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. She knew about the money. She just didn't know how he got it. That is an accounting error," Jamal stammered. "I can explain. It was for overhead." "It is embezzlement," David said. "And it is not just the consulting fees, the client dinners, the golf trips, the gifts. You have stolen over $200,000 from this company in the last 18 months. $200,000. I closed my eyes. I had given him $15,000 a month legally. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. He had to steal more. He had to bleed the beast until it died. The board has voted to press full criminal charges, David said, handing the paper to Jamal. The legal team is filing the complaint with the district attorney as we speak. This is your formal notice of termination and pending litigation. You are banned from all Titan premises. Your company car has been disabled remotely. Your company phone is wiped. Jamal took the paper. His hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. Dad, he said, looking at me, tears streaming down his face. Dad, please, you can stop this. You are the chairman. Just tell them it was a loan. Tell them I was going to pay it back, please. I don't want to go to jail. I looked at him. I saw the little boy who used to scrape his knees and come running to me for a Band-Aid. I saw the teenager who needed help with his math homework. But then I saw the man who served me cold leftovers. I saw the man who hired a corrupt doctor to declare me insane. I saw the man who locked me in a freezing basement and planned to sell my organs. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a cover-up. He wanted me to use my power to help him lie one last time. I stepped closer to him. I placed a hand on his shoulder. The wool of his coat was soft, expensive. It was bought with stolen money. I cannot help you, son, I said softly. Why? He sobbed, grabbing my lapels. Why? You have the power. You can fix this. I removed his hands from my suit. I brushed the spot where he had touched me. Because I am not just your father, Jamal, I said. I am the chairman. And a chairman has a responsibility to the company. To the employees who work hard and don't steal. To the people who built this with their sweat. If I let you go, I insult every honest man who works for me. I looked him in the eye. You wanted to be a big shot, Jamal. You wanted to live in the big world. Well, this is the big world. In the big world, when you steal, you go to prison. I signaled to the sheriff. Sheriff, I believe you have enough for the embezzlement charge as well. Sheriff Miller nodded, stepping forward with a second pair of handcuffs. Jamal Jefferson, you are under arrest for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand larceny. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Jamal screamed. It was a high, thin sound of pure despair. No, you can't. I am Jamal Jefferson. I am a director. The deputies grabbed him. They spun him around. The handcuffs clicked shut. The sound was final. Tiffany watched from the porch. She didn't move. She didn't try to help him. She didn't scream. She just watched her meal ticket getting cuffed and stuffed into the back of a squad car. David Sterling turned to me. Is there anything else, Chairman? I looked at the house. My house. The house I had bought with honest money and filled with dishonest people. Yes, David, I said. Have the locks changed. Today. And call the cleaning crew. I want this place scrubbed. It smells like rot. David nodded. It will be done. I turned my back on my son, who was weeping in the back of the police car. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a heavy, hollow ache in my chest. But I also felt lighter. The weight of the lie was gone. I looked up at Tiffany. She was still standing there frozen. I walked up the steps. I stopped in front of her. Your turn, I said. She flinched. She looked at the driveway where Jamal was being read his rights. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were hard calculating. She was already thinking of her next move. She was thinking she could talk her way out of this. She was thinking she was the victim. Otis, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't know. He lied to me too. He told me the money was his. I am just a victim here. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the envelope the investigator had given me, the one with the photos. I slapped the envelope against her chest. She grabbed it reflexively. Open it, I said. She opened the flap. She pulled out the photos. She saw herself at the Motel 6. She saw herself handing the flash drive to Marcus Thorne. Her face went white. Whiter than the frost on the lawn. Victim, I asked. I leaned in close. Jamal was a thief, I said. But you are a traitor. You sold us out to the competition. You slept with the enemy for pocket change. I pointed to the sheriff who was walking up the driveway toward us. Jamal is going to jail for greed, I said. But you are going to lose everything because you thought you were smarter than everyone else. I turned to the sheriff. Sheriff, I said, meet Tiffany Jefferson, or as Marcus Thorne knows her, his corporate spy. Tiffany dropped the photos. They scattered on the porch like a deck of cards. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine respect in her eyes. It was the respect of a prey animal looking at a predator it had mistaken for a rock. "You old bastard," she hissed. I smiled. I adjusted my cuffs. "That is Chairman Bastard to you," I said. And then I watched the sheriff take out the second pair of handcuffs. "You old lunatic," Tiffany screamed, her voice cracking like a whip across the frozen front yard. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You set us up. This is a trap. You planned this whole thing. Jamal, do something. Do not let him do this to us. Tell them he is crazy. Tell them he is making it all up." She was frantic, a cornered animal lashing out at the only thing standing between her and a jail cell. She looked at Jamal, who was currently being held by 2 deputies, his wrists bound in steel, his face pressed against the cold metal of the squad car. She wanted him to fight for her. She wanted him to be the hero she thought she married, the big-shot executive who could fix anything with a phone call and a bribe. But Jamal could not do anything. He was broken. He was sobbing quietly, his shoulders heaving under the weight of his own destruction. He looked at her with pleading eyes, hoping she had a plan, hoping she had a way out. He still thought they were a team. He still thought it was them against the world. He still thought she loved him. I looked at her. I looked at the fur coat she wore over her pajamas, the coat she had bought with a credit card I paid for. I looked at the diamond earrings she had retrieved from the spa somehow, or maybe she had hidden a second pair. She was a masterpiece of deception, a beautiful shell filled with rot. "You are right, Tiffany," I said, my voice calm, cutting through her hysteria. "I did plan this. I planned every second of it, but I did not set you up. You set yourselves up. I just turned on the lights." "You are sick," she shrieked. "You are a sick old man. We took you in, we gave you a home, and this is how you repay us, by destroying your own son." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I felt the thick envelope there warm against my chest. It was the ammunition I had been saving for this exact moment, the silver bullet. "I took you in," I corrected her, taking a step closer. "I bought this house, I paid the bills, I put food in your stomach when you were too lazy to work. And while I was doing that, while I was sleeping in a damp basement to give you space—" "What were you doing, Tiffany? I am his wife," she yelled. "I supported him. I stood by him." "Did you?" I asked. I pulled the envelope out. It was plain manila innocent looking on the outside, but inside it held the nuclear option. I looked at Jamal. He had turned his head to watch us, his cheek resting against the police car. He looked confused. He didn't understand why I was talking to her. He didn't understand why the sheriff hadn't arrested her yet. "Jamal," I said, "you stole from my company. You stole from me. You are a thief and a fool, but you loved her. I will give you that. You did everything for her. You embezzled $200,000 to buy her things, to keep her happy, to keep her looking at you like you were a king." Jamal nodded weakly, tears streaming down his face. "I did it for us," he whispered. "I know, son," I said, "but she didn't do it for you." I raised the envelope high in the air so the neighbors could see it, so the sheriff could see it, so the whole world could see the receipts. I threw the photos on the ground. They fluttered down like dead leaves in autumn, landing on the frost-covered driveway right in front of Jamal's face. The wind caught a few of them, flipping them over, revealing the glossy images printed in high definition. There were a dozen of them, photos taken in the dark, photos taken through the window of a Motel 6, photos taken in the back booth of a dive bar. Jamal looked down. He blinked, trying to focus through his tears. He saw Tiffany. That was clear. She was wearing the red dress he had bought her for their anniversary. She was laughing, her head thrown back. And then he saw the man she was laughing with. He saw the hand on her waist. He saw the kiss on the neck. He saw the face of the man who was whispering in his wife's ear. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a random lover. It was Marcus Thorne. Jamal let out a sound that I will never forget. It wasn't a scream. It was a strangled, gagging noise, as if he had just swallowed poison. He thrashed against the deputies, trying to get a better look, trying to deny what his eyes were seeing. No, he wheezed. No, not him. Anyone but him. Marcus Thorne, the owner of Thorne Logistics. The man who had been undercutting Jamal's prices for 2 years. The man who seemed to know every bid Jamal made before he made it. The man who had stolen Jamal's biggest client just last month, a loss that had driven Jamal to steal even more from Titan to cover the deficit. Tiffany froze. She stopped screaming. She stopped moving. She stared at the photos on the ground, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue. She knew. She knew there was no lie she could tell that would cover this. The camera does not lie. I looked at my son. I saw the light go out of his eyes. The betrayal of a father is one thing. A father represents authority, rules the past. But the betrayal of a wife, the betrayal of the person you sleep next to the person you commit crimes for, that is a knife in the back that never stops twisting. Jamal, I said, my voice hard and unforgiving, your wife is not just spending my money. She is not just living off the fat of the land. She has been selling you out, son. She has been selling Titan Logistics proprietary data client lists and bid strategies to Marcus Thorne for cash. I pointed at the photos. She meets him every Tuesday and Thursday, I continued. While you are at the office trying to cover up your embezzlement, she is at the Motel 6 handing over flash drives. She is getting paid $5,000 a drop. That is how she paid for the spa, Jamal. That is how she paid for the shoes. She didn't use your stolen money. She used her treason money. You are sleeping with the enemy, son, I said, and you bought the bed. Jamal stared at Tiffany. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, wild. He looked like he was having a stroke. The veins in his neck bulged. He pulled against the handcuffs, straining the metal until his wrists bled. Tiffany, he roared. It was a primal sound. Is it true? Tell me it isn't true. Tell me he is lying. Tiffany didn't answer. She couldn't look at him. She looked at the ground. She looked at the sheriff. She looked anywhere but at the husband she had sold for pocket change. Tell him, Tiffany, I said. Tell him about the flash drive in your purse, the one the sheriff is about to find. Tell him about the texts where you called him a loser and said you were just waiting for him to go to jail so you could leave with Marcus. Tiffany looked at me with pure venom. You hacked my phone, she hissed. That is illegal. I own the phone plan, Tiffany, I said. I pay the bill. I have full administrative access to every device on the Jefferson family plan. It is not hacking. It is parental controls. Jamal stopped struggling. He slumped against the car. He looked broken. He looked destroyed. The realization washed over him. He had destroyed his career, his reputation, and his relationship with his father for a woman who was laughing at him with his worst enemy. You sold me out, he whispered, to Thorne. You knew how much I hated him. You knew he was trying to ruin me. He has money, Tiffany shouted suddenly, her voice shrill and defensive. He has real money, not this fake allowance your daddy gives you. Marcus is a winner. You are just a middle manager with a gambling problem. I needed security. I needed a backup plan. A backup plan. She called her husband's destruction a backup plan. Jamal looked at her. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman he had defended against me for 5 years. He saw her clearly for the first time. He saw the greed. He saw the emptiness. I stole for you, he said, his voice cracking. I stole from my own father for you. And you got caught, Tiffany spat. Which proves you are a loser. Marcus didn't get caught. Marcus is smart. I stepped in. I had heard enough. Marcus is going to jail too, I said. Tiffany laughed. You cannot touch Marcus. He is a businessman. He didn't do anything wrong. Receiving stolen corporate property is a felony, Tiffany, I said. Industrial espionage is a felony. And since the information you sold him belonged to Titan Logistics and I am the chairman of Titan Logistics, I have already filed the charges. The FBI is raiding his office right now. Her laugh died in her throat. And you, I continued, pointing at her, you are an accomplice. You are the thief. You facilitated the transfer of proprietary data. That flash drive in your purse, that is 20 years in federal prison, honey. Tiffany clutched her purse to her chest. She looked around wildly as if looking for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. The driveway was blocked by black SUVs. The lawn was lined with neighbors. The sheriff was walking toward her, his hand on his handcuffs. Jamal looked at me. His eyes were dead. Dad, he said. Did you know she was doing this? I found out 3 days ago, I said. And you didn't tell me. I tried to tell you, son, I said. For years. I tried to tell you she was no good. I tried to tell you she was using you, but you wouldn't listen. You told me I was jealous. You told me I was old and bitter. You put her above me. You put her above your own blood. I looked down at the photos on the wet pavement. Sometimes, I said sadly, you have to let a man see the fire before he believes he is burning. The sheriff stepped up onto the porch. He didn't look gentle. He didn't look polite. He looked like a man who was tired of cleaning up the messes of greedy people. Tiffany Jefferson, he said, hand over the bag. No. she whimpered, backing away. No, it is mine. Hand it over. The sheriff barked. She threw the bag at him. He caught it. He opened it. He reached inside and pulled out a silver flash drive. It was small, innocent looking, but it contained the code the client lists the pricing algorithms of a multi-million-dollar company. Bingo, the sheriff said. He handed the bag to a deputy and pulled out his cuffs. Turn around, Mrs. Jefferson. No, she screamed. Jamal, help me. He is lying. Otis planted it. Jamal didn't move. He didn't even look at her. He was staring at the photo of Marcus Thorne's hand on his wife's waist. He was staring at the evidence of his own stupidity. Take her, Jamal whispered. Just take her away. The deputy grabbed Tiffany's arm. She fought, she scratched, she kicked. She lost all semblance of the high society lady she pretended to be. She was a street fighter now fighting for her survival. But she was no match for the law. They cuffed her. They dragged her down the steps, kicking and screaming profanities that would make a sailor blush. She cursed me. She cursed Jamal. She cursed Marcus Thorne for getting caught. They shoved her into the back of the second squad car. She slammed against the window, screaming silently behind the glass. I stood on the porch alone. The wind was picking up, biting through my suit, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt a strange, hollow silence. Jamal was in one car. Tiffany was in the other. My family was packed up and ready for transport to the county jail. I looked at Jamal one last time. He was looking at me through the window of the cruiser. He pressed his forehead against the glass. He mouthed one word, sorry. I looked at him. I wanted to cry, I wanted to scream, but I just nodded slowly. Sorry doesn't pay the rent, son, I thought. And it certainly doesn't buy back 5 years of betrayal. I turned to Ezekiel. Is it done? I asked. It is done, Otis Ezekiel said, closing his briefcase. The assets are secured. The criminals are in custody. The house is yours. I looked at the front door. The door I had broken the lock off of the night before. It doesn't feel like a victory, Zeke, I said. It never does. Ezekiel said, putting a hand on my shoulder. Justice isn't sweet, Otis. It is just necessary. I nodded. Take them away, Sheriff, I said. The sirens wailed. The lights flashed. The caravan of police cars and black SUVs pulled out of the driveway, leaving me standing alone on the porch of a big, empty house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The neighbors watched. They whispered. They judged. But I didn't care. I was Otis Jefferson. I was the chairman. And I had just cleaned house. The handcuffs were cold steel around my son's wrists, but the real chains were the ones he had forged himself out of arrogance and greed. The sheriff had allowed him one final moment before placing him into the back of the cruiser. Jamal stood on the driveway of the house he had bragged about for 5 years. He looked at the manicured lawn. He looked at the towering oak tree I had paid an arborist $3,000 to save last summer. He looked at the imposing brick facade that he told his friends was the fruit of his labor. He crumbled. It wasn't a graceful fall. His knees simply gave out. He slid down against the side of the police car until he was kneeling on the asphalt. The gravel bit into his expensive trousers, but he did not seem to notice. He looked up at me standing on the porch in my charcoal suit, and for a moment the thief vanished and the frightened child returned. Dad. He choked out, his voice thick with tears and snot. Dad, please. I know I messed up. I know I stole. I will go to jail. I will do the time. But please do not take the house. I looked down at him. The wind whipped my coat around my legs. It is my house, Dad, Jamal pleaded. It is the only thing I have left. When I get out, when this is over, I need a place to come back to. You cannot kick me out of my own home. It is illegal. I have rights. I have squatter's rights or tenant rights. You cannot just throw me on the street. He was bargaining with gravity. He was trying to negotiate with a hurricane. He still believed that possession was 9/10 of the law. He still believed that because he slept in the master bedroom, he owned the castle. I did not speak. I stepped to the side and nodded at Ezekiel. My old friend stepped forward. He opened his briefcase with a sharp click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet morning air. He pulled out a document bound in a blue legal folder. He walked down the steps, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the stone, until he stood directly in front of my kneeling son. Mr. Jefferson, Ezekiel said, his voice projecting so the neighbors could hear every syllable. You seem to be laboring under a significant misunderstanding regarding the nature of your residency here. Jamal looked at the folder. What misunderstanding? It is my house. The trust pays for it. The trust pays the mortgage, Ezekiel corrected. But the deed, as Mr. Henderson, the realtor, tried to tell you yesterday, is held by Jefferson Holdings, LLC. Jamal nodded frantically. I know. The holding company. Ezekiel flipped the folder open. He turned it around so Jamal could see the incorporation papers. They were yellowed with age, dated 30 years ago. Jefferson Holdings, LLC is not a blind trust, Ezekiel said. It is a sole proprietorship. And the sole proprietor, the man who owns every brick, every shingle, and every blade of grass on this property, is standing right behind me. Jamal's eyes moved from the paper to me. He squinted as if looking into the sun. You, he whispered, you are Jefferson Holdings. I walked down the steps slowly. I stopped beside Ezekiel. I bought this house 5 years ago, Jamal, I said. I bought it through the company because you told me you were struggling. You told me you needed a break. You told me you wanted to save money to start a family. So I let you move in. I pointed to the document. Read the fine print, son. Jamal leaned forward. His eyes scanned the legal text. Ezekiel read it aloud for him. The agreement signed 5 years ago is a tenancy at will. It grants Mr. Jamal Jefferson and Mrs. Tiffany Jefferson permission to occupy the premises as guests of the owner. It is not a lease. There is no rent. There is only the owner's goodwill. Ezekiel snapped the folder shut. And as of this morning, that goodwill has been exhausted. Jamal stared at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't a homeowner. He wasn't even a tenant. He was a guest who had overstayed his welcome by 5 years and $200,000. You tricked me, he whispered. You let me believe it was mine. I let you live rent-free in $1 million mansion, I said. I let you drive cars you didn't pay for. I let you eat food you didn't buy. I didn't trick you, Jamal. I carried you. And how did you repay me? You locked me in the basement. You fed me leftovers. You tried to sell my body. I leaned down, getting close to his face. The landlord is here, son, and your lease is terminated for cause. Jamal began to weep. It was a pathetic sound. But this is my home, he sobbed. It is a building, I replied. A home is where people treat each other with respect. You turned this place into a den of thieves. I straightened up and looked at the sheriff. Sheriff Miller, I said. Since the resident has been arrested for felonies committed against the property owner, I am exercising my right to secure the premises. I want them removed. Now. The sheriff nodded. He signaled to his deputies. The deputy hauled Jamal to his feet. Jamal sagged his legs, useless. Wait! Jamal screamed. My things, my clothes, my watches. You cannot keep my stuff. I looked at Ezekiel. The seizure order, I asked. Ezekiel pulled out another paper. Under the terms of the civil suit filed this morning regarding the embezzlement, Titan Logistics has been granted a preliminary lien on all personal property acquired with stolen funds. Ezekiel looked at Jamal over the rim of his glasses. That means the watches stay, the designer suits stay, the electronics stay. They are evidence, Jamal. They belong to the company you robbed. No, Jamal howled, thrashing against the deputy. You cannot take everything. We are not taking everything, I said calmly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a black plastic trash bag. I shook it open. It flapped in the wind like a flag of surrender. I handed the bag to the deputy, holding Jamal. Uncuff one of his hands, Sheriff, I said. Let him pack. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. You are a generous man, Otis. I give them 30 minutes, I said, looking at my watch. 30 minutes to go inside and pack whatever fits in this bag, but only essentials. No luxury items, no assets, just the clothes on their backs and a toothbrush. 30 minutes! Tiffany screamed from the other police car. She had been listening, her face pressed against the glass. You cannot do this. I have 40 pairs of shoes. I have furs. I walked over to her car. The deputy rolled down the window. You have 30 minutes, Tiffany, I said, and I suggest you prioritize warm socks. I hear the county jail is drafty this time of year. The sheriff unlocked their cuffs. He stood over them, his hand resting on his holster. You heard the man, he barked. 30 minutes, 1 bag each. Anything left behind stays with the property owner. Move. Jamal and Tiffany stumbled toward the house. They didn't run. They crawled. They walked past the neighbors who were now standing on the sidewalk watching the spectacle. They walked past Mrs. Gable, who was shaking her head in disgust. They walked past the mailman who had stopped his truck to watch. They entered the house that they thought was their kingdom. I followed them inside. Ezekiel and the sheriff came with me. The house was cold. The heat was still off. It smelled of stale air and desperation. Jamal ran to the master bedroom. Tiffany ran to the walk-in closet. I stood in the hallway watching. I saw Jamal grab a handful of Italian silk ties. "Put them back," Ezekiel said from the doorway. "Those were purchased with the corporate card in November." "Evidence." Jamal dropped the ties. He grabbed his golf clubs. "Evidence," Ezekiel said. Jamal screamed in frustration. He grabbed a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. "Fine," Ezekiel said. "Those are from Target 3 years ago. You can keep those." It was a humiliating strip search of their lives. Every item they touched was tainted. Every luxury they reached for was slapped out of their hands by the cold, hard facts of their crimes. Tiffany was in the closet crying over her shoe collection. She tried to stuff a pair of Louboutins into the trash bag. Sheriff Miller stepped in. "Those shoes cost $800, ma'am. That is an asset. Put them back." "But I need shoes," she wailed. The sheriff pointed to a pair of old sneakers in the corner. "Wear those." They scrambled. They fought. They tried to hide jewelry in their pockets, but the deputies patted them down. They tried to argue that the TV was a gift, but I produced the receipt showing I had paid for it. In the end, they stood in the foyer holding 2 half-empty trash bags. They were wearing sweatpants and old coats. They looked exactly like what they were. 2 people who had nothing. "Time is up," the sheriff said, checking his watch. Jamal looked around the foyer. He looked at the chandelier. He looked at the grand staircase. He looked at the life he had stolen. "Dad," he whispered, "please. Where are we supposed to go after they book us? If we make bail, where do we go?" I opened the front door. The cold wind rushed in. "I don't know, son," I said, "but you cannot stay here." I pointed to the street. "This house is for family, and I don't see any family here, just intruders. Get out." The deputies escorted them out. They walked down the driveway, their trash bags slung over their shoulders. It was a reverse image of the day they moved in. Back then, they had walked in like conquerors. Now they were leaving like refugees. I walked out onto the porch to watch them go. They reached the police cars. The deputies took the trash bags and tossed them into the trunk. Then they cuffed Jamal and Tiffany again. Jamal looked back at me one last time. His face was a mask of total defeat. He realized finally that there was no safety net. There was no backup plan. The bank of Dad was closed forever. The sheriff tipped his hat to me. "We will take it from here, Mr. Jefferson." "Thank you, Sheriff," I said. The cars started up. The lights flashed. They drove away, taking my son and his wife to a concrete cell. I stood on the porch of my empty, silent house. Ezekiel stood beside me. "You okay, Otis?" he asked. I took a deep breath. The air tasted cold and clean. "I am fine, Zeke," I said. I looked at the trash bags in the back of the retreating police cars. They wanted to put me in a home with everything I owned in a garbage bag. I buttoned my jacket. I just returned the favor. The sheriff looked at his watch and shouted "Mark," and the sound of that single word triggered a frenzy that was both pathetic and terrifying to witness. 30 minutes is a lifetime when you are waiting for a bus in the rain, but it is a blink of an eye when you are trying to salvage the wreckage of a fake life. Jamal and Tiffany did not walk into the house, they ran. They scrambled up the front steps, slipping on the frost, their movements jerky and uncoordinated like marionettes whose strings had been cut. I followed them inside. The house was freezing. The silence was gone, replaced by the frantic sounds of zippers tearing closets banging open and hangers clattering to the floor. Ezekiel walked beside me, his ledger open, his pen ready. He was the accountant of their doom. The sheriff and 2 deputies trailed us, their hands resting on their belts. Silent sentinels, ensuring that this eviction remained civil, even if it was brutal. We went to the master bedroom first. Tiffany was already inside the walk-in closet. She was hysterical. She was pulling designer dresses off the racks by the armful, silk and cashmere piling up on the floor around her ankles. She looked like a looting victim in her own home. She grabbed a bright orange Hermes Birkin bag from the top shelf. I knew that bag. I knew the bill for that bag. It cost $12,000. She clutched it to her chest like a mother holding a child. "Not that one," Ezekiel said from the doorway. His voice was calm, flat, and absolute. Tiffany spun around, her eyes wild. "This is mine," she shrieked. "It was a birthday gift. You cannot take my gifts." Ezekiel consulted his ledger, running his finger down a column of figures. Item number 42, he read aloud. Hermes Birkin purchased June 12th using the supplemental American Express black card issued to the Jefferson Family Trust. The primary card holder is Otis Jefferson. Technically, Mrs. Jefferson, that bag is the property of your father-in-law. You were merely the authorized user, authorization revoked. And she stared at him. She stared at the bag. But I used it, she stammered. It has my lipstick in it. Empty it, Ezekiel said, and put it back on the shelf. It is an asset. She screamed. It was a sound of pure frustration. She threw the bag onto the floor. She reached for a Louis Vuitton suitcase stored in the corner. Leave the luggage, the sheriff barked. Those bags cost $3,000 apiece. You are not dragging them on the concrete. Tiffany looked around frantically. She grabbed a pair of Chanel sunglasses. Company expense account, Ezekiel said without looking up. Evidence of embezzlement. Put them back. She grabbed a diamond tennis bracelet. Stolen funds, Ezekiel said. Put it back. She grabbed her laptop. Container of trade secrets and corporate espionage, Ezekiel said. Definitely put that back. The FBI will need to scrub it. Tiffany collapsed onto the pile of clothes. She was sobbing uncontrollably now, deep guttural heaves that shook her thin frame. Her makeup was running down her face in black rivulets, turning her into a grotesque mask of despair. She looked at the mountain of luxury surrounding her and realized with dawning horror that she owned absolutely none of it. She was a squatter in a museum of stolen goods. I stepped forward. I kicked the black plastic trash bag toward her. It landed next to her knee. Pack, Tiffany, I said. You have 20 minutes left, and I suggest you pack warm. The holding cell is colder than this house. She looked at the trash bag. She looked at me with eyes that held no more fight, only defeat. She began to stuff things into the bag. Not the silk, not the cashmere. She grabbed sweatpants. She grabbed old hoodies. She grabbed the socks she wore to the gym. The things that had no resale value. The things that nobody else wanted. The things that were actually hers. I turned and walked across the hall to the study. Jamal was there. He wasn't frantic like Tiffany. He was moving with a slow, dazed, mechanical rhythm. He was standing in front of the wall safe. The door was open. He was reaching inside. He pulled out a watch box. He opened it, revealing a Rolex Daytona with a platinum face. It was a heavy, beautiful piece of machinery. He stared at it. He ran his thumb over the glass. Put it back, son, I said from the doorway. Jamal didn't turn around. He just kept staring at the watch. I earned this, he whispered. I closed the deal with the shipping conglomerate in Tokyo. This was my reward. You closed that deal by bribing the procurement officer with company funds, I said. I read the emails last night, Jamal. And you bought that watch with a wire transfer from the operational budget. That is not a reward. That is evidence. That watch is going to be Exhibit A at your trial. Jamal's hand shook. He looked like he was going to throw the watch through the window. For a second, I saw the violence in him, the same violence that had made him lock me in a basement. Do not do it, the sheriff said, stepping into the room. Destruction of evidence is another 5 years, Jamal. Do not add to your tab. Jamal lowered his hand. He placed the watch back in the box. He placed the box back in the safe. He looked at his empty wrist. The pale band of skin where the watch used to be looked vulnerable, exposed. He turned to his desk. He reached for his iPad. Ezekiel cleared his throat. Titan Logistics Property. Jamal reached for his Mont Blanc pen. Purchased with the corporate card, Ezekiel said. Jamal reached for a crystal decanter of scotch. Also corporate card, Ezekiel said. And technically alcohol is not allowed in the county lockup. Jamal stood in the center of the room, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. He looked around. He realized there was nothing in this room that belonged to him. The desk, the chair, the computer, the art on the walls. It was all bought with money. He didn't have money. He stole her money I gave him. He was a paper tiger, and I had just lit the match. He looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed hollow. He looked like a man who had woken up from a dream to find himself falling off a cliff. What can I take, Dad? He asked, his voice cracking. What is mine? I pointed to the corner of the room. There was a cardboard box filled with old trophies from high school football, a few framed photos of him and me from a fishing trip 10 years ago, an old baseball glove. Those, I said. The things you had before you decided you were too good for this family. The things that money didn't buy. Jamal walked over to the corner. He picked up the baseball glove. He put it in the black trash bag. He picked up a picture frame. He looked at it. It was a photo of us on a boat smiling, holding up a bass. He looked happy in the photo. He looked like my son. He put the photo face down in the trash bag. 10 minutes, people, the sheriff shouted from the hallway. Wrap it up. The final descent was a blur of misery. Jamal and Tiffany met in the hallway. They were both holding bulging black trash bags. They were wearing sneakers and sweatpants. Tiffany's hair was a rat's nest. Her face was swollen from crying. The black mascara stained her cheeks like war paint gone wrong. Jamal looked catatonic. He moved like a zombie, stumbling over his own feet. They walked down the grand staircase. The staircase they had posed on for their Christmas cards. The staircase they had walked down like royalty every morning. Now they were dragging garbage bags behind them, the plastic scraping against the marble steps. The sound was distinct. Swish, thump, swish, thump. It sounded like the day they moved my things into the basement. I remembered that sound. I remembered Tiffany laughing as she threw my clothes into a bag just like this one. Throw it in the hole, she had said. Now they were the ones in the hole. They reached the foyer. The front door was open, framing the gray winter sky. The sheriff was waiting. Ezekiel was waiting. Wait, Tiffany said, stopping abruptly. My medication. I need my anxiety pills. They are in the bathroom cabinet. Ezekiel checked his list. Prescription medication is permitted provided it is in the original bottle with the label attached. Tiffany dropped her bag and ran back upstairs. She came back 2 minutes later, clutching a bottle of Xanax. She looked like she wanted to swallow the whole thing right there. Let us go, the sheriff said, taking Jamal by the arm. They walked out the door. The cold air hit them and they shrank into their coats. They walked past the manicured hedges. They walked past the fountain that was now dry because the water was shut off. I followed them out. I stood on the top step of the porch, my hands in my pockets. The neighbors had not left. If anything, the crowd had grown. People were standing on the sidewalks, their breath misting in the air, watching the fall of the House of Jefferson. They saw the trash bags. They saw the handcuffs. They saw the ruin. Mrs. Gable, the neighborhood gossip who had been ignored by Tiffany for 5 years, stepped forward. She was holding her phone, recording the whole thing. Nice bags, Tiffany, she called out. Are those the new spring collection? Tiffany didn't even look at her. She kept her head down, staring at her sneakers. She was broken. The arrogance, the pride, the cruelty, it had all been stripped away, leaving nothing but a scared, shivering girl who had bet everything on a lie and lost. The deputies opened the trunks of the squad cars. They tossed the trash bags inside. The sound was dull, final. It was the sound of a life being thrown away. They guided Jamal and Tiffany into the back seats of separate cars. The heavy doors slammed shut, enclosing them in their new reality. I looked at Jamal through the glass. He was slumped against the seat, his head resting on the window. He looked at me. His lips moved. I couldn't hear him, but I knew what he was saying. He was saying, why? Why did you do this, Dad? Why did you burn it all down? I looked at him and I felt a tear freeze on my cheek. I did it because you left me no choice, son, I thought. I did it because you tried to erase me. I did it because sometimes you have to burn the field to save the soil. The sheriff walked up to the porch. He tipped his hat. We are done here, Mr. Jefferson. We will process them downtown. The DA will be in touch about the grand jury testimony. Thank you, Sheriff, I said. The engines roared to life. The lights flashed blue and red, reflecting off the windows of the empty house. The cars pulled away slowly, rolling down the street, carrying the wreckage of my family toward justice. I watched them go until they turned the corner and disappeared. Then I looked at the house. The door was still open. It looked dark inside. It looked empty. It didn't look like my home anymore. It looked like a crime scene. Ezekiel closed his ledger. He clicked his pen. That is it then, he said softly. Protocol Omega is complete. The accounts are closed. The assets are secured. The house is vacant. I nodded. It is quiet, I said. It is, Ezekiel agreed. What will you do now, Otis? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the set of keys the sheriff had given me. The keys to the house. The keys to the kingdom. I turned and locked the front door. The deadbolt clicked. It was a solid, satisfying sound. I am going to get a hot meal, Zeke, I said. A real meal, not leftovers. And then I am going to find a hotel with a very soft bed and a very strong heater. And after that, I said, turning to face the street, I am going to start over. I have a lot of work to do. There are other old folks out there, Zeke. Folks who don't have a secret fortune. Folks who are being fed cold pasta in dark basements. I looked at my old friend. "I think I need to start a new union." Ezekiel smiled. He clapped me on the shoulder. "I will draw up the papers, Otis." We walked down the driveway together, leaving the mansion behind us. I didn't look back. The trash bags were gone. The rats were gone. The house was just wood and stone. I was Otis Jefferson. I was 74 years old. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my whole life ahead of me. The walk from the front porch to the curb was only 50 feet, but for my son and his wife, it must have felt like the Green Mile. The air was frigid, biting at their exposed skin through the thin fabric of their sweatpants, but the cold in the air was nothing compared to the chill coming from the sidewalk. When the deputies led them down the steps, the street was no longer empty. It had filled up silently like a tide rising in the night. The neighbors were there, all of them. There was Mr. Henderson, who lived 2 houses down, leaning on his cane. There was Mrs. Gable, standing with her arms crossed over her chest. There was the young couple from across the street holding their baby. There was the mailman who had paused his route and turned off his engine. They did not shout. They did not throw stones. They did not hold signs. They just stood there. They formed a silent gauntlet lining the driveway, staring with eyes that held no pity, only a deep, searing contempt. Jamal stumbled as he saw them. He looked around wildly, searching for a friendly face, searching for anyone who would look at him with the admiration he thought he deserved. He had spent 5 years strutting through this neighborhood in his Italian suits, driving his Porsche too fast, treating these people like they were the background extras in the movie of his life. He never waved. He never stopped to chat. He called the police if their dogs barked too loud. Now he was seeing them for the first time, and they were seeing him. They saw the handcuffs. They saw the trash bag slung over his shoulder. They saw the ruin of a man who thought he was a king. "Help me!" Jamal shouted, his voice cracking. "Mr. Henderson, tell them. Tell them this is a mistake. I am a good neighbor. I am the regional director." Mr. Henderson did not move. He did not blink. He just looked at Jamal, and then he looked at the ground and spat. Jamal flinched as if he had been slapped. He didn't know. How could he know? Jamal thought Mr. Henderson was just a retired mechanic living on a pension. He didn't know that 3 years ago, when Mr. Henderson's roof collapsed during a snowstorm and the insurance company denied the claim, I was the one who paid for the repairs. I wrote a check for $12,000 and told the contractor to say it was an anonymous grant from a veterans charity. I looked at the young couple across the street. The husband was glaring at Tiffany. Tiffany had called the HOA on them 4 times last month because their baby's stroller was left on the porch. She called it an eyesore. She didn't know that when the husband lost his job at the factory, I pulled strings with my old union contacts to get him an interview at a new plant. I put food on their table while Tiffany tried to fine them for existing. This was my neighborhood. These were my people. I had built a web of support and kindness here, quietly, anonymously, just like I had built my fortune. And my son and his wife had walked through it with muddy boots, treating everyone like dirt. Now the dirt was staring back. Tiffany was walking with her head down, trying to hide behind her hair. She was clutching her trash bag, dragging it on the asphalt. She was sobbing quietly, a pathetic sound that garnered no sympathy. She reached the end of the driveway where the police cars were waiting. Suddenly the line of neighbors parted. A small figure stepped forward, blocking Tiffany's path to the squad car. It was Mrs. Mabel. Mrs. Mabel lived in the small blue house next door. She was 80 years old, a widow who spent her days tending to her rose bushes. She wore a faded housecoat and slippers. She was the woman Tiffany had screamed at last week because Mrs. Mabel's cat had walked across our lawn. I watched from the porch. I remembered the incident vividly. I remembered Tiffany standing in the driveway screaming at this 80-year-old woman, calling her trash, calling her a senile witch, telling her she brought down the property value of the whole street. I remembered Mrs. Mabel crying silently while she gathered her cat. Mrs. Mabel stood there now in the middle of the driveway. She looked small, frail, but her eyes were hard as flint. She held something in her hand wrapped in a clear plastic bag. Tiffany stopped. The deputy tried to gently move Mrs. Mabel aside, but she held up a hand and the deputy paused. He knew Mrs. Mabel too. Everyone knew Mrs. Mabel. She baked cookies for the precinct every Christmas. Mrs. Mabel stepped closer to Tiffany. She looked at the designer sweatpants. She looked at the tear-streaked face. "Hello, Tiffany," Mrs. Mabel said. Her voice was soft, but in the silence of the morning it carried like a bell. Tiffany looked up. She sniffled. Mrs. Mabel, please, tell them I am a good person. Mrs. Mabel shook her head slowly. You are a hungry person, Tiffany, she said. You look starving. Tiffany nodded frantically, hoping for a crumb of kindness. Yes, I am. They locked the fridge. We haven't eaten in days. It is abuse. Please, do you have anything? Mrs. Mabel lifted the plastic bag. Inside was a heel of bread. It was green with mold. It was hard as a rock. It was the kind of thing you throw out for the birds, but even the birds might think twice. I brought you something, Mrs. Mabel said. She held out the bag. Tiffany stared at it, her face contorted in disgust. What is that? She whispered. It is leftovers, Mrs. Mabel said. It is old, it is cold, and it is spoiled. She thrust the bag into Tiffany's cuffed hands. Tiffany had to grab it or let it fall and hit her in the legs. She clutched the moldy bread against her chest. Take it, Mrs. Mabel said, her voice hardening into steel. Eat it, Tiffany recoiled. Why would you give me this? It is garbage. Mrs. Mabel stepped closer until she was inches from Tiffany's face. I heard you, she said. The night of the party. My window was open. I heard you laughing when you served that man cold pasta on a plastic plate. I heard you tell him to eat garbage. Tiffany's eyes went wide. She looked at the neighbors. They all nodded. They had all heard things. The walls of our house were thick, but the venom of my daughter-in-law was loud. Mrs. Mabel pointed a shaking finger at the bread in Tiffany's hands. That is what you served him, she hissed. That is what you thought he was worth. So now you take it. You eat it. And you get used to the taste, Tiffany, because where you are going the bread is stale and the water is cold and nobody cares if you are hungry. Tiffany looked at the moldy bread. She looked at the old woman she had tormented. She realized with a jolt of horror that this wasn't charity. It was a mirror. She dropped the bag. It hit the pavement with a dry thud. Mrs. Mabel didn't back down. Pick it up, she commanded. Tiffany looked at the deputy. The deputy looked at the sky. He wasn't going to help her. Tiffany bent down awkwardly, her handcuffs restricting her movement. She picked up the bag of moldy bread. She held it like it was a dead rat. Thank you, Mrs. Mabel said. Now get in the car. You are bringing down the property value of the neighborhood. The crowd erupted in a low murmur of approval. It wasn't a cheer. It was the sound of justice settling into the bones of the street. The deputy opened the car door. He guided Tiffany inside. She slid across the seat, clutching her trash bag of old clothes and the bag of moldy bread. She pulled her legs in and curled into a ball, hiding her face from the world. Jamal was loaded into the other car. He didn't look at the neighbors anymore. He stared straight ahead, his eyes fixed on a future that was suddenly very small and very gray. I stood on the porch watching it all. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Ezekiel. That was brutal, he whispered. It was necessary, I replied. I walked down the steps. I walked down the driveway, past the police cars, past the neighbors. I walked straight to Mrs. Mabel. She looked up at me. Her face softened. The hardness vanished, replaced by the warmth of an old friend. Otis, she said. You okay? I am okay, Mabel, I said. She patted my arm. We were worried, she said, when we didn't see you at the bus stop for 3 days, when the lights went out. We thought, well, we didn't know what to think, but we knew they were no good. I know, I said. I am sorry you had to see this. Don't be sorry, she said. It was the best show I have seen in 20 years, better than cable. She looked at the police cars. Are they coming back? No, I said. They are never coming back. Good, she said. Then maybe I can let my cat out again. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt on my face in a week. Let him out, Mabel, I said. The yard is safe. The rats are gone. The police cars started their engines. The sirens chirped once a signal to clear the way. The neighbors stepped back onto the curbs. They watched the cars pull away, rolling down the street, carrying the toxicity out of our lives. As the cars disappeared around the corner, the neighbors turned to me. They didn't applaud. They didn't cheer. They just nodded. One by one, they nodded. It was a silent salute, a recognition. They knew I was one of them. They knew I had handled my business. And they knew that the quiet old man in the faded coat was made of iron. Mr. Henderson raised his cane in a salute. The young couple waved. The mailman honked his horn and drove off to finish his route. I stood in the driveway, breathing in the cold air. It smelled like winter, but it also smelled like peace. Ezekiel walked up to me. Ready to go, Otis. I looked at the house. The front door was closed. The windows were dark. It was just a building now. A shell. I am ready, I said. But before we left, I walked over to the spot where Tiffany had dropped the moldy bread before picking it up. There were a few crumbs on the asphalt. I kicked them into the grass. I turned to Mrs. Mabel. Mabel, I said, I am going to be gone for a few days. I have some business to attend to. Can you keep an eye on the place? She smiled. You know I will, Otis. Nobody is getting on this porch unless I say so. I nodded. I knew she meant it. Mrs. Mabel was a better security system than anything money could buy because she was motivated by loyalty, not a paycheck. I walked to Ezekiel's car. I got in. The leather seat was warm. The engine was quiet. As we drove away, I looked back at the neighborhood one last time. I saw the small houses, the neat lawns, the people going back to their lives. I had spent millions of dollars on that mansion. I had filled it with expensive things. But the real value was out there on the sidewalk. Jamal never understood that. He thought value was something you wore on your wrist or drove in a garage. He didn't understand that value is what people do for you when you have nothing left to offer them. He was going to prison poor and alone. I was driving away rich and surrounded by an army, and the difference wasn't the money in the bank. It was the $5 bill in my pocket and the moldy bread in Mrs. Mabel's hand. Drive Zeke, I said. Let us go get some breakfast. I am starving. 1 month had passed since I watched the police cars carry my son away from the house I owned. You would think that 30 days in a county lockup pending bail would teach a man humility. You would think that sleeping on a metal cot and eating bologna sandwiches would break the delusion that he was a prince who had been momentarily inconvenienced. But greed is a powerful drug, and denial is its strongest side effect. I sat in the back of the courtroom wearing my charcoal suit, my hands resting on the head of my cane. Beside me, Ezekiel was arranging his files with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an amputation. Across the aisle sat Jamal and Tiffany. They were out on bail. They had found a bondsman willing to take a risk, and more importantly, they had found a lawyer. His name was Mr. Sterling, but he was no relation to my CEO. He was a strip mall shark with a shiny suit and a billboard on the interstate. He cost $5,000 as a retainer. I knew where they got the money. They didn't earn it. They borrowed it. They went to the kind of lenders who don't ask for credit scores but do ask for kneecaps as collateral. They had leveraged their freedom on one final desperate gamble. They were suing me. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of fiction. They claimed I was mentally incompetent. They claimed I had verbally promised them the house and the trust fund. They claimed I had suffered a psychotic break and used my undue influence as a majority shareholder to ruin Jamal's career out of spite. They wanted the house back. They wanted $20 million in damages. They wanted control. All rise, the bailiff shouted. Judge Harrison walked in. She was a woman I had known for 20 years, a no-nonsense jurist who had started as a public defender. She sat down and looked over her glasses at the circus in front of her. Mr. Sterling stood up. He buttoned his cheap jacket and launched into his opening statement. He painted a picture of a tragic misunderstanding. He described Jamal as a devoted son who had cared for his aging father only to be betrayed by the onset of dementia. He described Tiffany as a saint who had bathed me and fed me. My client, Mr. Jamal Jefferson, built that home. Mr. Sterling boomed, gesturing wildly. He poured his blood, sweat, and tears into that property. He cared for his father when no one else would. And in return, this confused, angry old man has stripped him of his dignity and his livelihood. We are asking the court to restore the status quo and grant guardianship of Mr. Otis Jefferson to his son. I listened. I didn't flinch. I watched Jamal. He was nodding along, wiping a fake tear from his eye. He believed it. He actually believed his own lie. He had rewritten history in his head so that he was the hero and I was the villain. When it was his turn to testify, Jamal took the stand. He looked at the jury with wide, pleading eyes. I love my dad, he said, his voice trembling. I really do. But he is not well. He forgets things. He gets aggressive. That night, the night he kicked us out, he was hallucinating. He thought he was a union boss from the 70s. He didn't know what he was doing, and the house Mr. Sterling asked. He gave it to me. Jamal lied smoothly. 5 years ago, he said, son, this is your legacy. I paid the bills, I managed the maintenance. It was my house in every way that matters. I looked at Ezekiel. He was doodling on a notepad. He looked bored. Your witness, Mr. Ezekiel, the judge said. Ezekiel stood up. He didn't walk to the podium. He stood right there at the defense table. No questions, Your Honor, Ezekiel said. Jamal blinked. Mr. Sterling looked confused. The jury whispered. No questions, Mr. Sterling asked, sneering, because you know my client is telling the truth. Ezekiel smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who sees a lamb wandering away from the herd. We have no questions for the plaintiff, Ezekiel said, because we prefer to let the plaintiff speak for himself in a more candid setting. Ezekiel picked up a remote control. Your Honor, with the court's permission, the defense would like to introduce Exhibit D. What is Exhibit D? Mr. Sterling demanded. Surveillance footage, Ezekiel said calmly. Jamal froze on the stand. Tiffany went rigid in her seat. Surveillance, Mr. Sterling sputtered. That is inadmissible. My clients did not consent to being recorded in their own home. It wasn't their home, Ezekiel corrected him. It was Mr. Otis Jefferson's home. And as the sole owner of the property, he installed a closed-circuit security system 3 months ago to monitor the safety of the premises. 3 months. I watched Jamal's face. He was doing the math. 3 months ago was before the party, before the lockout, before the fall. The judge nodded. Proceed. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. The date stamp in the corner read November 14th. The location was the kitchen. The video was high definition. The audio was crisp. Jamal and Tiffany were standing at the island. I was not in the room. Tiffany was plating dinner. She was scooping mashed potatoes onto a plate. I watched as the Tiffany on the screen looked over her shoulder to make sure the door was empty. Then she leaned over the plate. The courtroom gasped. On the screen, Tiffany gathered phlegm in her throat. She spat a thick green glob of mucus directly into the mashed potatoes. She took a spoon and stirred it in, mixing it until it was invisible. She laughed. Eat up, old man, she said to the empty room. Hope you choke on it. In the courtroom, the real Tiffany covered her mouth with her hand. She made a gagging sound. The jury looked at her with pure revulsion. One juror turned his chair away from her. Jamal on the stand looked like he was going to be sick. He hadn't known about that part. Even he had limits, and seeing his wife spit in his father's food seemed to cross one of them. But Ezekiel wasn't done. Exhibit E. Ezekiel said, clicking the remote. The scene changed. It was the bathroom. The date was December 1st, 2 weeks before the eviction. Jamal was standing at the sink. He was holding 2 orange prescription bottles. One was labeled Jefferson Otis. The other was an over-the-counter bottle of generic ibuprofen. I watched my son on the screen. He opened my blood pressure medication. These were the pills that kept my heart from exploding. They were vital. He dumped my pills into the toilet. He flushed them. Then he opened the ibuprofen bottle. He poured the white ibuprofen tablets into my prescription bottle. He shook it. They looked similar enough. To an old man with bad eyes, they would pass. Jamal on the screen held the bottle up to the light. Let us see how long that ticker lasts without the juice, he whispered. Stroke out, Dad. Just stroke out and save us the trouble. The courtroom was silent. Dead silent. It was the silence of people witnessing evil. This wasn't just disrespect. This wasn't just greed. This was attempted murder. He was actively trying to kill me by depriving me of life-saving medication. Jamal on the witness stand was shaking so hard the chair rattled. He couldn't look at the screen. He couldn't look at the judge. He looked at his hands, the hands that had swapped the pills. Mr. Sterling, the shark lawyer, stood up. He was pale. He realized he wasn't fighting for a lawsuit anymore. He was fighting to stay out of an accessory charge. Your Honor, he stammered. I was not aware of this evidence. I request a recess. Request denied? Judge Harrison said. Her voice was ice. She looked at Jamal. She looked at him with a gaze that could strip paint from a wall. Mr. Jefferson, the judge said, did you switch your father's medication? Jamal opened his mouth. No sound came out. He looked at me. I looked back. I didn't look angry. I looked disappointed. I looked at him and saw the end of my line. I didn't mean... It was just... Jamal babbled. Sit down, Mr. Jefferson, the judge barked. She turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, I am dismissing this lawsuit with prejudice. There is no case here. The plaintiff has not only failed to prove his claim, he has provided evidence of his own moral depravity. She turned to the bailiff. Bailiff, lock the doors. Nobody leaves. She looked at the prosecutor who happened to be in the courtroom for another case. Mr. District Attorney, are you seeing this? I am, Your Honor, the DA said, standing up. He looked furious. I am referring this matter to your office immediately, Judge Harrison said. I want charges filed today. Attempted bodily harm, elder abuse, tampering with prescription medication, and whatever else you can stick on them. She slammed her gavel down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. This court is adjourned, and may God have mercy on your souls because this court certainly will not. The room erupted. The bailiff moved toward Jamal. This time he didn't use the polite handcuffs. He grabbed Jamal by the collar of his suit and yanked him out of the witness chair. Tiffany tried to run. She bolted for the door, but the bailiff had locked it. She pounded on the wood, screaming, "No, we sued him. You are supposed to help us." Deputies swarmed her. They put her on the ground. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. Ezekiel closed his briefcase. We walked toward the exit. The deputies parted to let us through. I stopped next to Jamal. He was face down on the table being cuffed. "Dad," he wheezed. "Dad, help me. They are going to kill me in prison." I looked down at him. "You tried to stop my heart, son," I said softly. "You tried to kill me to get a house." I leaned in close. "My heart is still beating," I said. "But yours?" "Yours is made of stone, and stones sink." I walked past him. I walked past Tiffany, who was screaming about her rights. I walked out of the courtroom into the hallway. The air was stale, but it felt better than the air inside. Ezekiel checked his watch. "Lunch," he asked. "Lunch," I said. We walked down the marble hallway. Behind us, the screams of my family faded away. They had gambled everything on one last lie, and the truth had just collected the debt. The heavy steel door of the state penitentiary slammed shut with a sound that vibrated in my teeth. It was a sound my son Jamal would hear every day for the next 15 years. He had traded his Italian leather loafers for cheap canvas slip-ons and his tailored suits for a jumpsuit the color of a traffic cone. I did not visit him. I did not put money on his books. I let him sit in the cell he had built for himself brick by brick. Word travels fast in prison, especially when your crime is plastered all over the local news. Jamal thought he would be respected because he was a white-collar criminal, a man who stole with a pen instead of a gun. He thought he would be treated like a celebrity in the cell block. He was wrong. There is a code inside even among thieves and murderers. You do not hurt women, you do not hurt children, and you never ever touch your parents. I heard through Ezekiel's contacts what happened during Jamal's first week in general population. He was sitting in the chow hall staring at a tray of food that was somehow worse than the cold pasta Tiffany had served me. An older inmate, a man doing life for armed robbery, sat down across from him. This man had tattoos covering his arms, scars that told stories of violence and survival. He looked at Jamal, not with anger, but with disgust. "I heard about you," the lifer said quietly. "You are the guy who switched his daddy's heart pills. You are the guy who tried to sell his old man for parts." Jamal tried to bluster. He tried to use his corporate voice, the one he used to intimidate junior sales reps. "It was a misunderstanding," he stammered. "I am a businessman. You are a punk," the lifer spat. "My daddy beat me every day of my life, and I still sent him money when I got my first score. You had a father who gave you a mansion, and you tried to put him in the ground." Jamal didn't finish his meal that day, or the next. He learned quickly that in the hierarchy of the prison yard, the man who betrays his blood is lower than the dirt on the floor. He spent his days in isolation not because the guards put him there, but because he was terrified to step out of his cell. He was alone, surrounded by thousands of men. He had wanted to be a big shot. Now he was nothing but a cautionary tale in an orange jumpsuit. While Jamal was learning the hard lessons of confinement, Tiffany was learning the brutal reality of freedom without funds. She filed for divorce 3 days after their arrest. She didn't even wait for the trial. She abandoned Jamal with the same speed she had abandoned her morals, hoping that cutting ties would save her from the wreckage. It didn't. The divorce granted her nothing because Jamal had nothing. The civil suits from Titan Logistics stripped her of every asset she thought she had hidden. The forensic accountants found the offshore accounts where she had stashed her spy money. They took it all. They took the jewelry. They took the designer clothes. They even took the car she had leased in her name. She was left with a suitcase of old clothes and a mountain of debt. The credit card companies she had defrauded were not as forgiving as I had been. They garnered her wages before she even had a job. They hounded her day and night. She moved into a studio apartment above a mechanic shop where the smell of oil and exhaust permeated the walls, a constant reminder of the garage she used to force me to clean. She applied for jobs. She tried to get back into marketing, into sales, into anything that required a blazer and a smile. But a felony record for corporate espionage is a stain that does not wash out. No one wanted to hire a spy. No one wanted to hire a thief. She ended up taking the only job that didn't ask questions. The only job that was desperate enough to take her. 6 months after the trial, I was walking through the city center mall. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was there to meet Ezekiel for lunch at the steakhouse on the top floor. I was wearing a new suit, a navy blue wool blend that fit me perfectly. I walked with my head held high, my cane tapping a steady rhythm on the polished tile floor. I decided to stop at the restroom near the food court. It was crowded, noisy, filled with teenagers and shoppers. I walked toward the entrance. There was a yellow plastic sign blocking the door, closed for cleaning. I almost turned away. But then I heard a voice. It was a voice I had heard screaming insults at me for 5 years. A voice I had heard plotting my demise through a heating vent. It was not screaming now. It was muttering. Stupid floor, stupid kids making a mess. I stopped. I looked over the yellow barrier. There she was. Tiffany was on her knees. She was wearing a gray uniform that was 2 sizes too big. Her hair, once perfectly styled and highlighted, was pulled back in a messy bun held together by a cheap plastic clip. She wore yellow rubber gloves that went up to her elbows. She was scrubbing the grout between the tiles with a toothbrush. A toothbrush. I watched her. I watched the woman who had demanded I take out the trash so her guests wouldn't smell me. I watched the woman who had taped my refrigerator shut. I watched the woman who had laughed while I ate cold leftovers. She looked up. She sensed someone watching her. She wiped a strand of hair from her face with her forearm, leaving a streak of cleaning foam on her cheek. Her eyes met mine. She froze. The toothbrush fell from her hand and clattered onto the wet tile. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The noise of the mall seemed to fade away, leaving us in a bubble of silence. I saw the recognition in her eyes. I saw the shame. It hit her like a physical blow. She scrambled backward, knocking over a bucket of gray, dirty water. It splashed over her shoes. They were the same old sneakers the sheriff had forced her to wear the day of the eviction. She opened her mouth. I could see her throat working. I knew what she was thinking. She was expecting me to laugh. She was expecting me to point and jeer. She was waiting for the lecture, for the "I told you so," for the righteous anger of the man she had wronged. She was waiting to be seen. Even in her humiliation, she wanted to be acknowledged. She wanted to be the center of my attention, even if it was negative. I looked at her. I looked at the bucket. I looked at the gray uniform. And then I looked right through her. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I simply shifted my gaze past her to the mirror on the wall behind her. I adjusted my tie. I checked the knot. I smoothed the lapel of my jacket. I treated her like she was part of the architecture, like she was a fixture in the bathroom, like she was invisible. Tiffany's face crumbled. The lack of reaction was worse than any insult. If I had screamed, it would have meant she still had power over me. It would have meant she still mattered enough to make me angry. But my silence told her the truth. She didn't matter. She was gone. She was a ghost from a bad dream I had already woken up from. I turned around. I stepped back over the yellow sign. "Otis," she whispered. Her voice was a cracked, broken thing. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I walked back out into the bright lights of the mall. I walked toward the steakhouse where my friend was waiting, where a hot meal was waiting, where my life was waiting. I left her there on her knees in the mess she had made. That was her prison. It wasn't made of bars and guards like Jamal's. It was made of memory and regret. Every tile she scrubbed, every toilet she cleaned would remind her of the mansion she lost. Every person who walked past her without seeing her would remind her of the man she tried to erase. She had wanted to be special. She had wanted to be elite. Now she was the help. I sat down at the table in the restaurant. Ezekiel was already there sipping an iced tea. He looked at me. "Everything okay, Otis?" he asked. "You look light." I picked up the menu. I looked at the steak section. I wasn't going to order leftovers. "I am fine, Zeke," I said. "I just saw an old ghost." "A ghost?" Ezekiel asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," I said. "But it is gone now. Just a shadow in the corner." I ordered the ribeye, medium rare, with a side of asparagus. As I ate, I thought about Jamal in his cell and Tiffany in her uniform. I didn't feel happy about their suffering. I wasn't a cruel man. But I felt a sense of balance. The scales had tipped back. The debt was paid. They had tried to bury me. They forgot I was a seed. And now, while they withered in the dark, I was finally ready to bloom. The for sale sign in the front yard didn't stay up for long. In this market, a brick colonial in a gated community is blood in the water for sharks, and I knew plenty of sharks. I sold it to a young couple, a doctor and an architect, who looked at the high ceilings and saw a future while I looked at them and saw only the past. They didn't ask about the scratches on the basement doorframe where I had pried the hinges loose. They didn't ask about the faint discoloration on the driveway where Tiffany had dropped the moldy bread. They just signed the check. I stood in the empty foyer one last time. The house was silent. It was the same silence that had suffocated me for 3 years, but now it felt different. It wasn't the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a blank page. I walked to the kitchen where I had eaten alone in the dark. I walked to the study where my son had planned my demise. I didn't feel ghosts. I didn't feel nostalgia. I felt like a man who had finally put down a heavy rucksack after a 50-mile march. I locked the door and threw the keys to the realtor. I didn't look back. The house was just wood and stone, a monument to a mistake I had finally corrected. With the money from the sale and the liquidated assets from the trust, I didn't buy a condo in Florida. I didn't move into a retirement village to play bingo and wait for the end. I wasn't done working. I was just done working for ingrates. I bought an old brick building downtown 3 blocks from the Union Hall where I had made my name 40 years ago. It had good bones, but it needed work. I hired a crew, not the lowest bidder, but the guys who needed the work, the guys with calloused hands and families to feed. We gutted it. We put in new wiring, new floors, and bulletproof glass in the lobby. Above the door we hung a simple sign: the Jefferson Legal Defense Fund for the Elderly. It wasn't a charity, it was a fortress. I sat in my new office, which was smaller than Jamal's study, but infinitely more important. My phone rang. It wasn't a creditor, it wasn't a whining relative. It was Mrs. Gable from the old neighborhood. She had a friend, a 70-year-old widow whose nephew was trying to trick her into signing over her deed. "Send her in," I told Mrs. Gable. "Tell her to bring every scrap of paper she has, and tell her she doesn't have to be afraid anymore." That was my life now. I spent my days sitting across from men and women who looked like me, people with gray hair and tired eyes, people who had worked their whole lives only to be treated like prey by their own blood. I listened to their stories. I heard the same shame I had felt, the shame of raising a child who turned into a wolf. And then I unleashed Ezekiel on them. We sued guardianship scammers. We froze the assets of abusive children. We recovered stolen pensions. We became the nightmare of every greedy heir in the city. I didn't just give these people legal aid. I gave them their spines back. I saw them walk in stooped and broken, and I saw them walk out with their heads high, knowing that someone had their back. I was building a legacy. Not a legacy of blood, but a legacy of action. Jamal had wanted an inheritance he could spend. I was building an inheritance that would fight. 6 months after the house sold, I took a Friday off. It was a rare indulgence. I drove down to the marina. The air smelled of salt and gasoline, a smell I had grown to love. Waiting in the slip was the only frivolous thing I had bought for myself. She was a 40-foot fishing yacht, sleek and white, named the Martha after my late wife. She would have hated the expense, but she would have loved the freedom. Ezekiel was already on board, wearing a polo shirt and boat shoes, looking less like a shark lawyer and more like a man who was ready to retire but didn't know how. He had a bottle of vintage Cabernet open on the table. "You are late," Chairman Ezekiel called out. "The tide is turning." I stepped onto the deck. The boat rocked gently beneath my feet. It was a steady, comforting rhythm. I was finishing up a case, I said, casting off the lines. "That nephew I told you about, the one trying to steal his aunt's house?" "Yeah," Ezekiel said, pouring the wine. "What happened?" "I bought the mortgage note," I said, taking the wheel. "I am his bank now, and I just called the loan." Ezekiel laughed. "You are a cold man, Otis Jefferson." I steered the boat out of the harbor. The engine hummed a deep, powerful vibration that traveled up through the soles of my shoes. We cut through the waves, leaving the city behind. The skyline shrank until it was just a jagged gray line on the horizon. We dropped anchor 5 miles out. The ocean was calm, a sheet of hammered copper reflecting the setting sun. We baited our hooks and cast our lines into the deep blue water. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip lower, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. I took a sip of wine. It was rich and complex, warming my chest. It tasted nothing like the cold water I had drunk in the basement. "You think about him?" Ezekiel asked quietly, not looking at me. I knew who he meant. I didn't have to ask. Every day, I said. "Do you regret it?" Zeke asked. I looked at the horizon. I thought about Jamal sitting in his cell. I thought about the phone calls I refused to accept. I thought about the letters I burned. I don't regret what I did, I said slowly. I regret what I didn't do. I regret that I tried to buy his love instead of earning his respect. I regret that I shielded him from the world so much that he never learned how to survive in it. I created a weak man Zeke, and the world eats weak men. I reeled in my line, a little feeling the tension. But I fixed it, I added. It was a hard fix. It was a brutal fix. But it was necessary. He is in prison, yes. But for the first time in his life, he is facing consequences. He is living a real life. Maybe it will break him, or maybe, just maybe, it will make him into something resembling a man. And if it doesn't, Ezekiel asked. Then he stays exactly where he belongs, I said. I put down my rod and picked up my wine glass. I looked at my hands. They were old hands, spotted and scarred, but they were steady. They weren't trembling anymore. I am not a father anymore, Zeke, I said. Not in the way I used to be. I am not a provider. I am not a safety net. I took a deep breath of the salty air. I am just Otis, and for the first time in 74 years, that is enough. We watched the sun disappear below the water. The stars came out one by one. I looked up at them. I remembered the night I broke out of the basement. I remembered looking at the moon through that tiny, grimy window and promising myself I would see the sky again. I was seeing it now. It was vast, it was beautiful, and it was mine. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't abandoned. I was free. I raised my glass to the empty ocean, to the stars, to the memory of the man I used to be. To the correction, I whispered. Ezekiel clinked his glass against mine. To the correction. We sat there under the canopy of the universe, two old lions who had fought off the hyenas and lived to see another sunset. The water lapped against the hull, a gentle lullaby. I closed my eyes and listened. I didn't hear insults. I didn't hear demands. I didn't hear the creaking of floorboards above my head. I heard peace. And in that silence, I finally understood the lesson I had paid such a high price to learn. A parent's love is often mistaken for weakness, a boundless resource to be mined without gratitude. My son believed my silence was submission, and my generosity was his birthright. He forgot that the hand that feeds can also lock the door. Respect isn't an inheritance. It is a currency you must earn every single day. When you strip a man of his dignity, pray you haven't stripped him of his mercy too. Because when a quiet man finally decides to speak, his voice can shatter your entire world. I didn't lose a son. I regained my self-worth. Here is the call to action, CTA in English, consistent with the style of the previous scripts. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this.